Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. I was at the grocery store, strolling through the aisles, gathering the usual items I needed for the week. It was one of those rare, quiet mornings where the store wasn't crowded and I was able to take my time. As I picked out a loaf of bread, I suddenly heard a voice from behind me. "Hi, Sarah," the voice said, its tone friendly, almost familiar. I turned around, expecting to see a neighbor or an acquaintance, but the woman standing there was a complete stranger to me. She was older than me, with short gray hair and a warm smile, wearing a soft blue sweater. I felt a strange shiver run down my spine, as though I should recognize her, but nothing about her seemed familiar. "Excuse me, do I know you?" I asked, trying to mask the unease creeping up my neck. The woman's smile didn't falter. She just looked at me for a moment, her eyes slightly narrowed, as if studying my face. Then, without a word, she simply smiled again and turned away, walking down the aisle and disappearing around the corner. I stood there, staring after her, feeling completely bewildered. How did she know my name? I didn't know anyone who looked like her, and I certainly hadn't seen her before. My heart started to race, and I wondered if I had somehow forgotten meeting her. Maybe it was someone from a past job or an old friend I'd lost contact with, but no matter how hard I thought, I couldn't place her. I shook my head and tried to dismiss it as some odd mistake or coincidence. But as I continued shopping, her words echoed in my mind. "Hi, Sarah." I tried to think back to every person I knew, every face I had crossed paths with, but nothing connected her to anyone I had ever known. I felt a strange sense of discomfort, as though I had just experienced something I wasn't supposed to understand. I finished my shopping, but I couldn't shake the strange encounter. As I paid for my groceries and left the store, I found myself scanning the parking lot, half expecting to see her standing by her car, watching me. I quickly pushed the thought out of my mind. It was nothing more than a weird coincidence, I told myself. When I got home, I tried to put it out of my mind. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how unsettling the whole experience had been. I tried to remember if anyone had ever greeted me like that with such certainty, but I came up empty. It was as if the woman knew something about me that I didn't. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through social media, hoping to distract myself. As I scrolled through posts and pictures, something caught my eye. A picture of a woman, standing at a wedding with a few friends, one of whom looked strikingly familiar. It took me a moment to realize, but when it hit me, my heart skipped a beat. The woman in the picture had the same smile, the same warmth, the same kind eyes as the woman at the grocery store. I leaned forward in my chair, staring at the photo, my pulse quickening. The photo was from an event I had attended years ago, but I couldn't recall this woman being there. I scrolled through the comments, hoping to find some clue that might explain the connection, but nothing stood out. I had to know more. I went back to the store the next day, hoping to see her again. My heart pounded in my chest as I walked through the aisles, scanning the faces of the people around me, but there was no sign of her. I felt ridiculous. I had come here just to find someone I had never met, and yet something told me I needed to know who she was. The days that followed were consumed by thoughts of that woman. I found myself researching names in old yearbooks, trying to track down anyone who might have known her. I even asked my family and friends if they recognized her, but no one seemed to have any idea who she was. It was as if she existed outside of any memory, outside of anything I could understand. One afternoon, while I was at a local cafe, I saw her again. She was sitting at a table by the window, sipping coffee, looking perfectly at ease. I couldn't believe it. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should approach her, but the desire to know who she was, why she knew my name, overwhelmed my hesitation. I walked over to her table, my heart in my throat. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, and the same warm, knowing smile spread across her face. My breath caught in my chest. "I know this is strange, but you greeted me by name at the grocery store yesterday, and I don't remember ever meeting you. Can you help me understand who you are?" Her smile faltered for a brief moment, and she studied me carefully. Then, as if deciding something in her mind, she slowly stood up and took a deep breath. "Sarah," she said softly, "sometimes people come into our lives for a reason, even if we don't always understand why." My mind raced, but before I could respond, she turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving me standing there, more confused than ever. I watched her leave, my mind reeling with questions. Why had she said that? What did she mean by it? I sat there for a long time, staring out the window, trying to process what had just happened. Who was she, and how did she know me? It wasn't a coincidence anymore. It couldn't be. There was something I was missing, something important, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I left the cafe and returned home, the image of her smile lingering in my mind. For weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was out there, waiting for me to remember something, waiting for me to understand. But I never saw her again, and as time passed, the memory of that strange encounter faded, becoming another one of life's many unanswered mysteries. But every now and then, when I'm walking down the street or browsing through the aisles of a store, I catch a glimpse of someone who looks just a little too familiar, and for a fleeting moment, I wonder if I'll ever learn the truth behind the woman who greeted me by name. Story 2. I woke up with the soft light of morning filtering through the curtains. For a moment, everything felt normal, peaceful. But as I shifted in bed, I noticed something was off. The side of the bed where my partner usually slept was cold. I reached out, expecting the warmth of their body, but there was nothing. A wave of confusion washed over me. I had just fallen asleep next to them an hour ago. I sat up, my heart beginning to race. Their absence didn't make sense. I called out their name, half expecting them to walk out of the bathroom or from the kitchen, but there was no response. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the fog of sleep, but when I glanced around the room, there were no signs that they had even gotten up. Their shoes were still by the door, their clothes were hanging on the chair. Nothing seemed disturbed. I threw off the covers, my feet hitting the cold floor as I stood up and walked through the house, calling their name. The silence in the house seemed too loud, too heavy. I checked every room, the kitchen, the living room, even the bathroom. The house was empty. There were no signs of them anywhere. I ran a hand through my hair in frustration, trying to make sense of what was happening. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I grabbed my phone and dialed their number, the screen buzzing in my hand. It rang once, then twice, then straight to voicemail. I frowned, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. They never let their phone go to voicemail. They always picked up, even if it was just a quick "I'm busy" or "I'm in the shower." But this time, there was nothing. I hung up and called again, but it went straight to voicemail once more. I couldn't understand it. I sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling a wave of anxiety creeping up on me. It wasn't like them to just leave without a word. They had been right beside me not long ago. I tried to calm myself, convincing myself that maybe they had gone out for a quick errand or run to the store. But as the minutes passed and the ringing of their phone continued to go unanswered, the unease grew. I stepped outside, hoping to find some sign of them. The driveway was empty, and the car was gone. I looked down the street, but there were no signs of them walking anywhere. I checked the front steps, the garden, the backyard, nothing. It felt like they had vanished, disappeared into thin air. I called their phone again, praying that they would pick up, but it went straight to voicemail again. My mind started to race, jumping from one theory to another. Maybe they'd gone to a friend's house without telling me. But why wouldn't they have left a note or sent a text? Why wouldn't they pick up the phone? My thoughts were spinning in circles, and I felt an overwhelming sense of panic building inside me. I ran back inside, pacing back and forth across the living room, trying to come up with an explanation that made sense. But nothing did. I sat down on the couch, my hands trembling as I stared at the phone. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened, something that I wasn't aware of. I opened the contacts on my phone and called their best friend, hoping they might know where they were. The phone rang, but no one picked up. I tried again and then a third time. The same thing. No answer. The sense of dread that had been building in my chest for the past hour intensified. I felt like I was in a nightmare, like I was living in some surreal version of reality where things just didn't add up. I thought about calling the police, but something stopped me. What would I even tell them? My partner had been in the house an hour ago and was now gone, with no sign of where they went. It wasn't a crime, not yet, but the situation felt increasingly sinister. I had to find them. I had to understand what was happening. I checked the time again. It had only been about an hour since I fell asleep next to them. How could they be gone without a trace? My mind kept circling back to one thought: they had been right there, only an hour ago. But now there was nothing. No signs, no clues, no messages. My hands were shaking as I typed out a message to their work, asking if anyone had seen them that morning. I hit send, then immediately regretted it. What if it was nothing? What if they were just out running an errand and I was overreacting? I sat back down, trying to think logically. But every time I tried to calm myself, the emptiness of the house seemed to echo louder. The silence was overwhelming. I called their phone again, but again it went straight to voicemail. My throat tightened, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. It had been over an hour now. This was no longer something simple. This was turning into something much darker. I decided to drive around the neighborhood, hoping to find some sign of them. Maybe they had just gone for a walk. Maybe their phone had died. There had to be a logical explanation. But as I drove through the streets, each house looked the same, empty and quiet. There was no sign of their car, no sign of them anywhere. I returned home, the feeling of dread still gnawing at me. The house felt too quiet, too still. I walked back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the spot where they had been lying only hours before. I tried to force myself to calm down, but my thoughts kept racing. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. They had just been here, right beside me. The phone buzzed in my hand. A message from their work. I quickly opened it, hoping for some reassurance, some clue that would make this all make sense. The message was simple. We haven't seen them today. Is everything okay? I felt a chill run down my spine. Something was wrong, and I was starting to understand that this wasn't just an accident or a misunderstanding. My partner had been here, and now they were gone. I didn't know where they were, and I didn't know what had happened, but I was going to find out, no matter what it took. Story 3. It was a chilly evening when the stray dog first appeared. I was walking home from the bus stop, my hands buried deep in my pockets, trying to ignore the biting wind. As I turned the corner to my street, I noticed a small figure in the shadows, moving steadily toward me. At first, I thought it might be a cat, but as it got closer, I realized it was a dog, Scruffy, with matted fur and a look in its eyes that seemed both wary and hopeful. I paused for a moment, unsure of what to do. The dog stopped just a few feet away, its tail wagging gently. It didn't bark or approach too closely, but its eyes locked onto mine, as if silently pleading for attention. I wasn't a dog person, but something about its quiet demeanor made me feel a pang of sympathy. I knelt down slowly, offering a hand. To my surprise, the dog moved forward cautiously and sniffed my fingers before nudging them with its cold nose. It was clear the dog hadn't had a proper meal in a while. Its ribs were visible beneath the thin fur, and there was a layer of dirt and grime on its coat. After a few moments, I stood and glanced around, wondering where it had come from. There were no other houses nearby with dogs, and I didn't recognize it. With a sigh, I decided to take it in for the night. I had some leftover food from dinner, and I figured it was the least I could do. The dog followed me without hesitation as I walked into my apartment. I quickly filled a bowl with water and placed it near the kitchen. The dog lapped at it greedily, then turned to the food I had set out. It ate quietly, almost as though it had been starving for days. Afterward, it curled up in the corner of the living room, its tired eyes closing as it fell into a deep sleep. I sat on the couch, watching it, unsure of what to do next. I wasn't used to caring for animals, and the idea of keeping the dog seemed absurd, but something about its presence felt comforting. The night passed uneventfully, with the dog sleeping soundly at my feet. It didn't move much, barely stirred, except for the occasional shift in position. I woke up early the next morning, the sound of the dog's soft breathing a reminder of the strange visitor from the night before. I stretched and made my way to the kitchen, where I found the dog's bowl empty. It must have been hungry again, I thought. But when I went to check on it, the corner of the living room where it had slept was empty. Panic set in as I scanned the room, my heart racing. The dog had vanished. It hadn't wandered off, it couldn't have. I had checked the door when I came in last night, and it had been securely locked. I walked through the apartment, calling out softly, but there was no sign of the dog anywhere. Maybe it had just wandered off during the night, I thought, but then I noticed something strange. There was a piece of paper lying on the doorstep. I opened the door cautiously, half expecting to see the dog there, but there was nothing. Just the note. It was folded neatly, the edges crisp, and written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. I unfolded it carefully, my fingers trembling. The message was short, but it sent a chill down my spine. Keep it. It's yours now. I stood there, frozen for a moment, staring at the words. My mind raced with questions. Who had left this note? How had they known about the dog? And why would they want me to keep it? I looked down at the paper again, the strange feeling that I was being watched creeping up my spine. There was no return address, no sign of the person who had left it, just the note and the strange, unsettling message. My first instinct was to disregard it, to forget about the whole thing. Maybe the dog had a home, or maybe it was just passing through. But something about the note gnawed at me, making me uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a simple case of a stray dog. There was something darker behind it, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, my thoughts constantly drifting back to the dog. I couldn't focus on anything else, my mind consumed by the image of its sad, tired eyes. As the sun began to set, I found myself pacing the apartment, feeling the weight of the note in my pocket. I knew I had to make a decision, but I wasn't sure what the right choice was. Should I ignore the note and forget about the dog, or should I try to find it again to see if it was really meant to be mine? Just as I was about to give up, I heard a soft scratching at the door. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I approached the door, my hand shaking as I reached for the handle. When I opened it, I was stunned to find the dog standing on the other side, looking up at me with those same pleading eyes. It wagged its tail once before sitting down, as if waiting for me to make the next move. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to close the door and walk away, but the other part, the part that had already fed it, already felt a strange connection, was telling me to keep it, to take it in. The note, the strange circumstances, they all seemed to be pointing in one direction. The dog was meant to be mine, whether I liked it or not. I stepped aside, allowing the dog to enter. It trotted into the living room, then turned back to look at me as if waiting for my next move. I walked over to the couch and sat down, my mind still reeling from the strange events of the past 24 hours. The dog settled next to me, curling up at my feet once more. This time I didn't try to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. It was clear that the dog was here to stay. The note had been right. It was mine now, whether I was ready for it or not. And as I sat there, the weight of the strange events pressing down on me, I realized that I might never understand why. But I also knew one thing for certain: the dog wasn't just a stray anymore. It was a part of my life, and somehow I was going to have to live with that. Story 4. For weeks I had been receiving calls from an unknown number. Every time my phone rang, I checked the screen to see a string of random digits that didn't belong to anyone I knew. I thought nothing of it at first, dismissing it as a wrong number or a telemarketer. The calls would come in at all hours of the day, during lunch breaks, late at night, sometimes in the middle of a meeting. And each time I answered, there was nothing but silence on the other end. At first, I wondered if it was just a technical glitch, some strange malfunction with my phone. But as the calls continued, I became increasingly unsettled. I would hold the phone up to my ear, waiting for a voice to speak, but all I would hear was the soft hum of static. It was always the same: no message, no sound, just empty air. And every time I hung up, I felt a little more uneasy, as though something wasn't quite right. Days turned into weeks, and the calls became more frequent. I began to dread answering my phone, even when it rang during the most ordinary moments. There were days when I felt as though I could hear someone's breath on the other side of the line, but when I listened closely, it was only silence. It felt like I was being watched, and the creeping sensation gnawed at me every time the phone buzzed with an incoming call. I tried blocking the number, but the calls kept coming through. They always came from a different set of digits, each call a new, faceless number. It didn't matter what I did, the unknown caller would find a way to contact me. I started to feel like I was losing control over my own phone, my own privacy. I didn't know who it was or why they were doing this, but the silence was starting to wear on me. I began to wonder if I was imagining it all, or if there was something darker lurking behind those calls. It wasn't until one afternoon, while I was sitting on the couch, trying to distract myself with a book, that I received another call. I glanced at the screen, as usual, seeing the unfamiliar number flash on the display. I considered ignoring it, as I had done countless times before, but something made me pick up the phone. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fear, but I pressed the button to answer. For a moment there was the same silence I had become accustomed to. My heart pounded in my chest as I held the phone to my ear, listening to the eerie quiet. And then, just as I was about to hang up, a voice broke through. It was low, deliberate, and sent a chill down my spine. "I know what you did. I know what you did." The words were clear, cold, and piercing. My blood ran cold as I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I gripped the phone tighter, trying to steady my breath, but all I could hear was the faint click of the line as the call abruptly ended. My hand shook as I lowered the phone from my ear, staring at the screen in disbelief. What did they mean? What did they know? The words echoed in my mind over and over again. I know what you did. The phrase was so simple, but it felt like a threat, a warning, something ominous hanging in the air. My mind raced, trying to piece together what could possibly be the reason behind this strange torment. I had done nothing wrong, nothing that would warrant such a cryptic message, or so I thought. I tried to convince myself that it was just another prank call, another bizarre hoax. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more than that. The tone of the voice had been too deliberate, too purposeful. Whoever was calling knew something I wasn't ready to confront. But what? What? In the days that followed, the calls continued, but this time I couldn't bring myself to answer. Each time my phone buzzed with an unknown number, my pulse quickened and my hands trembled. I started to feel like I was living in a constant state of dread, never knowing when the next call would come or what it would bring. My life began to revolve around those calls, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being hunted by someone or something that knew far more about me than I was comfortable with. I tried to retrace my steps, looking for anything in my past that could explain the strange message. Had I wronged someone? Had I hurt anyone without realizing it? But nothing came to mind. I had always tried to live my life with honesty, never thinking I had any reason to be afraid. Yet, with every passing day, the unease grew. The knowledge that someone out there knew something about me, something I wasn't even aware of, gnawed at me. A week later, I received another call. This time, I didn't hesitate. I answered it immediately, desperate for answers, ready to confront whatever had been tormenting me. The same eerie silence greeted me on the other end, followed by a pause. And then, the voice returned, colder than ever. "Don't you remember?" it whispered. "You'll remember soon enough." I felt the blood drain from my face. What was happening? What had I forgotten? My mind spun with confusion and terror as I tried to make sense of it all. The voice sounded so familiar, yet I couldn't place it. It was as though I had heard it before, but I couldn't remember when, or where, or why. I spent the rest of the day replaying that last call over and over in my head. The words lingered, each one like a haunting riddle. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know where to start. Who could I turn to? Who would believe me if I told them about the persistent caller and the cryptic messages? In desperation, I decided to reach out to a friend. I explained everything that had been happening, the calls, the silence, the strange words, and they listened intently. At first, they suggested it was just a prank or a wrong number. But when I mentioned the "I know what you did" message, their expression changed. They told me it sounded like something out of a thriller movie, and I couldn't help but agree. The next few days passed in a blur of fear and uncertainty. I avoided answering my phone, but the calls kept coming. Then one afternoon, the call came again. This time, I didn't answer. But when I checked my voicemail, the message was waiting for me. It was the same voice. "You'll remember soon enough." I had no idea what that meant, but one thing was certain: the calls weren't going to stop until I figured it out. Story 5. One evening, I decided to take a different route home. I was tired of the usual drive, the same streets, the same turns. I wanted something new, something that might break the monotony. As I made a left turn onto a road I had never noticed before, a sense of curiosity mixed with an odd feeling in the pit of my stomach. The road was narrow, bordered by tall trees whose branches seemed to weave together overhead, forming a tunnel of sorts. It felt a little eerie, but I convinced myself it was just a new path, something to make the ride interesting. The further I drove, the more unfamiliar the road became. There were no streetlights, and the darkness seemed to swallow everything around me. I glanced at the rearview mirror, but I didn't see any other cars. No signs, no buildings, no houses, just the same endless stretch of asphalt. It felt like I was driving through an abandoned part of town, a place that had long been forgotten. The road itself looked unkempt, as though it wasn't regularly traveled. But I continued forward, thinking that it would eventually lead somewhere. As I drove on, I began to notice that there was no change in the scenery. It was as if I was stuck in some kind of loop. The same dark trees lining both sides of the road, their shadows stretching long in the dim light from my headlights. No matter how many curves or bends I took, the trees remained identical, like something out of a dream. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but there was no one around, no sign of life anywhere. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the nagging sensation didn't leave. I checked the time and was surprised to see that I had been driving for over an hour. I had expected to reach a town or at least a landmark by now, but there was nothing. No gas stations, no restaurants, nothing familiar. Just the endless stretch of road, the trees, and the silence that seemed to envelop me. The sense of unease continued to grow in my chest. I glanced at the GPS, but it had no data on this road. It was as though it didn't exist, like I had stumbled into some forgotten place that didn't appear on any map. I slowed the car down, trying to get my bearings. I had taken turns, yes, but I couldn't recall the exact path I had followed. The road seemed to have no end, no beginning, and no direction. It was as if it was stretching out infinitely in all directions. I made a mental note to turn around, but when I tried to retrace my steps, I found myself in the same place, the same stretch of road, the same trees. I thought I must have missed a turn, but no matter how far I drove, it felt like I hadn't moved at all. The strange sensation of being trapped deepened. I turned the car around and drove back in the opposite direction, hoping that I could find a familiar landmark, something that would confirm I wasn't just losing my mind. But even as I drove, I felt like I was getting nowhere. The same shadows loomed from the trees, the same curve of the road that seemed to repeat itself. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror again, hoping to see the familiar sights of home, but there was nothing. Just the same endless stretch of asphalt, as though the road had no end and no beginning. I started to panic. How had I ended up here? What had I missed? I pulled over to the side of the road, my mind racing. I checked the GPS again, but it was still blank. I looked around, hoping to spot something that would tell me where I was, but there was nothing. No street signs, no houses, no other cars. Just the same trees, the same empty road stretching out in both directions. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I could feel the sweat gathering on my brow, and my heart pounded in my chest. I decided to drive forward again, hoping that somehow I had just taken the wrong turn. Maybe I had missed an exit, maybe the road branched off somewhere I hadn't seen. But after driving for what felt like hours, I still couldn't find a way out. The same trees, the same road, the same lack of signs. The air felt thick with tension, like the very land itself was holding its breath. It felt as if the road was stretching on forever, refusing to let me leave. I turned around again, this time with no hope of finding a way out. I drove, not knowing where I was going, just trying to get away from the feeling that was slowly overtaking me. I glanced at the clock, but it made no sense. The time seemed to be stuck, not moving forward, as though the world outside of the car had stopped entirely. I wanted to scream, to bang on the steering wheel, but the silence kept me rooted in my seat. It was the silence that unnerved me the most. No birds, no insects, no hum of electricity, nothing. Just the rhythmic sound of my tires on the road. Eventually, I stopped the car again, unable to take it any longer. I stepped out of the car and stood in the middle of the road, hoping that somehow the air would feel different, that I would see something that would break the strange hold this place had on me. But there was nothing. The road stretched out endlessly in both directions, the trees looming above me like silent sentinels. I felt small and insignificant, as if I were trapped in a place where time had no meaning. Desperate, I got back into the car and made one final attempt to leave. I drove forward, hoping that maybe, just maybe, there was an exit I hadn't seen. The road twisted and turned, but nothing changed. And then, after what felt like an eternity, I turned a corner and found myself back where I had started. The same street I had left earlier that night. The same familiar houses, the same streetlights flickering on in the distance. I was back. It was as though the road had never changed, as though I had never left at all. I sat there in my car, breathless, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The road had taken me somewhere I couldn't understand, and then it had returned me to the very place I had started. I didn't know if I had driven in a circle or if the road had somehow manipulated time and space, but I knew one thing for sure: whatever it wasn't something I ever wanted to experience again. And from that night on, I never took that route again. Story 6. The draft first made its presence known on a cold autumn evening. I was sitting in my living room, sipping tea, when I noticed a sudden chill that seemed to sweep across the room. It wasn't a gust of wind, more like a cold spot lingering in the air. I glanced around, checking the windows, doors, and the fireplace, but everything was secure. The room felt fine, yet that coldness stayed, as if something was hiding in the shadows just beyond my sight. Over the following days, the draft persisted. It wasn't constant, but it returned every night, creeping around my legs as I sat watching TV, or drifting over my shoulders when I worked at my desk. I couldn't make sense of it. I checked the windows again, tried the doors, and even inspected the walls for any cracks or openings that might explain the chill, but there was nothing. The air was always colder in the corner of the room, as if something unseen was moving there, waiting. At first, I tried to ignore it, dismissing the draft as a trick of my mind, maybe just the weather playing with my senses. But when it didn't stop, I grew more and more unsettled. It felt like the coldness was following me. Even when I moved to a different chair or changed the direction I was sitting in, the draft seemed to shift with me, never leaving. I couldn't get comfortable, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One evening, I decided to stay up late, hoping to catch the source of the coldness. I sat in the middle of the room, watching the clock tick by slowly, my eyes scanning every corner of the space. The silence was suffocating, and the draft remained. It wasn't like a breeze, it was as if the air itself had become cold and heavy. There was something about it that felt wrong, as if the room was alive and watching me. The next day, I called a friend to come over. She was more of a skeptic, someone who would laugh at the idea of ghosts or strange happenings, but I hoped she could at least give me a rational explanation. We spent hours together, going over every inch of the living room, inspecting the windows and doors, and even checking the ventilation system. Nothing. There was no source for the draft. The room still felt oddly cold, but I didn't want to appear paranoid, so I brushed it off. That night, the draft returned stronger than ever. It moved through the room like a whispering breeze, chilling my skin, but it didn't stop. It continued, even after I turned on the heater, even after I wrapped myself in blankets. I lay awake for hours, staring into the dim light of the room, straining to hear any sign of movement. The air felt so still. Yet there was something unsettling about the way it shifted, as if there was a presence in the room that couldn't be seen. The next morning I called a professional. An old man who specialized in home inspections arrived, skeptical but willing to look around. He checked the foundation, the ducts, and the insulation, but came up with no answers. He muttered to himself about old houses and how things shift with time, but he couldn't explain the chill. He left with a shrug, suggesting I get used to it. But I couldn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it, something I wasn't seeing. Weeks passed, and I began to dread entering my living room. The draft didn't just linger, it began to feel more active, almost as though it was drawing closer to me. I started to hear sounds, faint but distinct. The sound of footsteps in the hall outside, the soft scrape of something moving across the floor, like a chair being dragged. Every time I looked, there was nothing there. It was like the house itself had become a living thing, creeping around me in the shadows. One evening I decided to confront whatever it was. I set up a camera in the living room, hoping to capture anything that would explain the strange occurrences. The night passed in its usual silence, the draft still lingering, colder than ever, moving along the edges of the room. I checked the footage the next morning, but all I saw was the room as I had left it, empty, still, but for the cold air that swirled gently around the space. By now I was too afraid to be in the room after dark. I moved my activities to the kitchen, leaving the living room untouched. I began to research old homes, hoping to find an answer that would make sense of the draft. I learned about settling foundations, cracks in old houses, and strange air currents, but nothing seemed to fit. The more I looked, the more I found references to strange, unexplainable events tied to the air, the way it could grow colder and heavier, as if it was infused with something not of this world. One night, when the draft returned with renewed strength, I could hear a low whispering sound. It was so faint at first that I thought it was the wind, but as it grew louder, I realized it was something else, something more insistent, like words being spoken just beyond my hearing. I stood frozen in place, my heart racing. The words were unclear, but the tone was unmistakable. Something was trying to communicate, and it wasn't human. I left the house for the night, too scared to stay any longer. The next day I packed a bag and checked into a hotel. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that I had let my imagination run wild, but the draft had become a part of me. It was like a shadow that followed me everywhere I went, reminding me that something in that room was waiting, watching, moving just out of reach. The house was empty when I returned, but I knew something was different. The air was heavier now, thicker with an almost tangible presence. The draft no longer whispered. It howled through the walls, as if it was trying to tell me something. I could feel the weight of it as I stepped into the living room once more, knowing that whatever was hiding in the shadows had been waiting for me to return. I had to leave again, this time for good. But no matter where I went, I couldn't escape the feeling that the draft was still with me, following me like a memory I couldn't outrun. The house had become a place I couldn't enter, a place where the air itself held secrets, and those secrets were waiting to be uncovered. I could never shake the feeling that the coldness would always be there, watching, waiting for the day when I finally understood what it wanted. Story 7. I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through my phone when I noticed a message from an old friend. The name on the screen was familiar, a name I hadn't seen in years. Evan. He was someone I had lost contact with after he moved away, and I had always wondered what happened to him. The message was simple, just a few words that read, "Hey, I need to talk to you. Call me when you get a chance." My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the message. uncertain if it was really him or some mistake. I immediately went to respond, my fingers flying across the screen, excited to hear from someone I hadn't spoken to in so long. I typed to Evan, "Is this really you?" and hit send. I waited. The seconds felt like minutes as I stared at the screen, watching the delivered status beneath the message. A few moments passed, but there was no reply. I started to feel a twinge of unease creeping up my spine. Maybe he was busy or just didn't see the message yet. I shrugged it off and tried calling the number instead. The phone rang a few times, but then the call was cut off with a sharp tone, followed by a recorded voice stating that the number had been disconnected. My stomach twisted. I tried again, thinking it was just a fluke, but the same message played. Evan's number was no longer in service. I felt a chill run down my spine as I wondered if this was some kind of mistake or prank. I had just received a message from him, yet the number didn't even exist anymore. Confused, I tried to think back to when I had last heard from Evan. It had been years, at least 4 or 5. He had disappeared without a trace after moving away, and I hadn't heard anything from him since. He never replied to my last attempts at contacting him, and I eventually just accepted that we had drifted apart. But now, suddenly, this message had appeared, and then the number was gone. I opened up my social media, hoping to find anything that could shed some light on the situation. I found his profile right away, but when I clicked on it, I was hit with another wave of confusion. His page hadn't been updated in years. In fact, the last post he had made was from nearly 6 years ago, a picture of a road trip he had taken. The posts before that were just as old, nothing current at all. I couldn't find any recent comments or activity, and his profile was almost like a digital ghost, suspended in time. I checked his friends list to see if anyone had posted anything recent about him, but it was the same. There was no sign of life in the past few years. A knot formed in my chest. It didn't make sense. If Evan had really reached out to me, why was everything about him so dead? I refreshed his page several times, hoping that maybe, just maybe, something would change, but it remained frozen in time. No new posts, no new pictures, just that same empty digital space. I decided to search the internet for his name, hoping to find some information that could explain the sudden message and the disconnect. There was nothing. No news articles, no updates, no mention of him anywhere. I typed his full name into various search engines, but the results were always the same, nothing. I started to wonder if something had happened to him, something that made him disappear without a trace. The more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. I had no answers, just a message, a disconnected number, and a profile that hadn't been touched in years. As I sat there, the quiet of the room around me felt suffocating. The uncertainty gnawed at me, and I found myself staring at the screen, wondering if I had missed something, if there was some piece of information that would make everything make sense. I thought about calling some of our mutual friends, but then I hesitated. What if they hadn't heard from him either? What if I was the only one he had contacted? Suddenly I had an idea. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts, looking for someone who might know more. There was one number I hadn't tried yet, someone who had been closer to even when we were all friends. Lily. I had always kept in touch with her, even after Evan disappeared, and she might have some answers. I tapped her number and waited as it rang, praying that she would pick up. After a few rings, I heard her voice on the other end. "Hello," she answered, sounding slightly confused but warm as always. "Hey, Lily," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's been a while. I need to ask you something about Evan." There was a pause on the other end, and then she responded, her voice hesitant. "What about Evan? You've heard from him?" I felt a surge of relief, but it quickly turned into confusion. "Yeah, I just got a message from him. But when I tried to call, his number was disconnected, and his social media hasn't been updated in years. I don't know what's going on." Lily was quiet for a moment before speaking again, her voice lower. "That's strange," she said softly. "I haven't heard from him in ages either. But there's something you need to know. After he left, I tried reaching out, but I found out that, well, there were rumors. Rumors about him being involved in something that caused him to cut ties with everyone." My heart skipped a beat. "What kind of rumors?" "I don't know the full details," she said, her voice shaking a little. "But I heard something about him being in some kind of trouble, and then one day it was like he just disappeared. No one could reach him, and his phone was disconnected. His social media went quiet too. No one's heard from him since." I felt a cold rush of panic. The message, the disconnected number, the ghost-like profile, it all started to make a sickening kind of sense. But then why would he have contacted me now? After all these years? Was something wrong? Was he in danger? I thanked Lily and hung up, feeling more lost than ever. There was a part of me that wanted to dig deeper, to keep searching for answers. But another part of me feared what I might uncover, or worse, what might happen if I did find out. For now, all I had was the message, the silence, and a lingering sense that I was being pulled into something far darker than I could have imagined. Story 8. It started as a minor inconvenience, something that didn't seem worth worrying about at first. Every night around 11 p.m., the lights in my apartment would flicker on and off for about a minute. It wasn't enough to cause a full blackout, but it was enough to make me pause and take notice. At first, I assumed it was just a glitch in the electrical system, something that would clear up on its own, so I didn't think much of it. The flickering became more consistent as the days went by, but still, it was no more than an annoyance. I called the power company to report the issue, but they assured me that everything looked fine with the electrical grid. They suggested that maybe there was something faulty with my apartment's wiring. I found that odd because the wiring had been checked just a few years ago when I moved in, and everything had been deemed up to code. But I decided to have an electrician come by anyway, just to rule out any issues. The electrician spent a couple of hours in my apartment, checking every socket and the main panel in the basement. When he was done, he gave me the all clear, saying everything seemed fine. "It might just be a coincidence," he said, but the flickering continued every night at the same time. I was starting to get frustrated, but I tried to tell myself it wasn't worth stressing over. After all, it wasn't as if the lights were going out completely. It was just a nuisance. The situation took a strange turn when I noticed something unusual about the flickering. It wasn't just random anymore. The lights would flicker in a pattern, as though they were trying to communicate something. At first I dismissed it as my imagination running wild, but then I started to wonder if there was more to it. It was almost as if the lights were following a rhythm, a pulse that seemed deliberate. I'd sit in the living room watching as they blinked on and off, and I'd swear the interval between each flicker was always the same, like a heartbeat. One night, I decided to stay awake and watch it more closely. As 11 p.m. approached, I sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling light in the living room. The clock struck 11, and just as expected, the lights began to flicker. At first it was just a quick flash, then another, and then it slowed down as if it were trying to adjust to something. That's when I noticed the pattern, long flickers, then short bursts, then long again. It felt almost rhythmic, like someone was trying to communicate in Morse code. I grabbed my phone and started recording, wondering if I could capture whatever was going on. The lights continued their strange rhythm, and for the first time I felt a chill crawl down my spine. It wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. It was unsettling. I could feel my pulse quicken as I stared at the lights, waiting for them to stop. But they didn't. The longer I sat there, the more I felt like I was being watched, like something unseen was lurking just beyond the reach of the light. I could almost hear a whisper in the flickering, a faint sound that sent a shiver through me. I stopped recording, my heart pounding, and stood up from the couch. I walked over to the light switch, half expecting the lights to go out completely, but they didn't. Instead, they flickered again, this time more violently, like they were trying to send a message. The shadows in the room seemed to grow longer, the edges of the furniture warping in the dim light. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, and I couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. I had no explanation for it, no reason why it should feel so ominous. The next night, the flickering began again at 11 p.m. This time I wasn't alone. My friend Mark had stayed over, and when the lights started flickering, he gave me a puzzled look. "What's going on with your lights?" he asked. I shrugged, trying to downplay the whole situation, but I could see the unease on his face. As we sat there in the living room, watching the lights flicker, Mark grew more tense. "That's creepy," he muttered, his eyes scanning the room nervously. Then the lights went out completely. It was as though someone had flipped a switch. We sat in the darkness, the silence deafening. "That's not normal," Mark said quietly. I couldn't agree more. I reached for my phone, using its light to guide me toward the fuse box in the basement. I flipped the breaker back on, but when the lights returned, the flickering resumed with a vengeance. This time it was more intense, more chaotic, as though the lights were fighting against something invisible. The next few days were a blur. I didn't sleep well, the constant flickering haunting my every moment. I couldn't focus on anything without feeling the weight of the lights pressing on me, like they were following me, watching me. I called the power company again, but they insisted there was nothing wrong with the grid. I asked if there had been any unusual reports of similar issues in the area, but they told me they hadn't received any complaints. It felt like no one believed me. I began to feel like I was losing my mind. One evening I decided to try something different. I sat in the living room again, but this time I didn't wait for the flickering to start. I turned off all the lights in the apartment, except for the one in the living room. I sat in the dark, listening for any signs of what was happening. As 11 p.m. approached, I held my breath, waiting for the inevitable flicker. But this time it didn't come. I waited in silence, the tension building. But nothing happened. I sighed in relief, thinking that perhaps it was finally over. But then I heard something. It was a low hum, just beneath the sound of the silence. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, vibrating in a way that made my skin crawl. I stood up, my legs trembling, and walked over to the light switch. As I reached for it, the lights flickered one last time, flickering like a heartbeat, slow and deliberate. The hum grew louder, and then I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of someone standing behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. The presence was all around me, a suffocating weight in the air. I realized then that the lights weren't the problem. The problem was something else, something far more sinister that had been waiting for me in the shadows. And no matter how many times I called the power company, no matter how many electricians I brought in, I could never escape the feeling that the flickering was just the beginning. Something was watching me, and it wasn't going to stop. Story 9. I woke up to a strange sight on my doorstep, a large, unmarked box resting against the side of my front door. There was no label, no return address, just a heavy cardboard box that seemed out of place. My curiosity piqued. I stepped forward, hesitant at first, wondering who could have left it there. I carefully picked it up, feeling its weight shift slightly, as if something was inside that was fragile. The silence around me felt too quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. I carried the box inside, the air in my house thick with anticipation. Setting it down on the kitchen table, I grabbed a knife and sliced through the tape. The cardboard folded open easily, revealing the contents inside. A broken clock, its hands frozen in place at exactly 3:15. It was an antique, ornate, with brass accents and delicate engravings. The clock's face, once white and clean, was cracked down the middle, rendering it useless. But what caught my eye wasn't the clock itself, it was the note resting beside it. The note was simple, just a few words scrawled in uneven handwriting. Time is running out. No signature, no explanation, just those 4 words, and then silence. My heart skipped a beat. I felt a shiver creep up my spine, but I couldn't explain why. What did this message mean? Who sent it, and why? The clock, broken as it was, seemed to echo the urgency of the message. I stared at it, unable to look away, as though it held some deeper significance. I examined the clock more closely, running my fingers over the cracked glass. There was something familiar about it, something I couldn't place. It looked like something from a time long past, something that should have been forgotten. But as I turned it over, I noticed something strange, small, almost imperceptible writing etched into the back of the clock. The letters were faded, barely legible, but I could make out the word Everest. A chill ran through me. Was this some sort of clue? A reference to something hidden in plain sight? For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the image of the broken clock and its cryptic message. I tried to focus on my daily routine, but every time I glanced at the clock on the wall, I felt a creeping sense of unease. What did the note mean? What was it trying to tell me? The words echoed in my mind over and over, growing louder with each passing minute. Time is running out, but for what? And from whom? That night, I sat at my desk, the broken clock resting in front of me. I tried to think logically, to make sense of the situation. Maybe it was some sort of prank, someone with too much time on their hands. But the more I thought about it, the less plausible it seemed. No one knew I lived here. No one knew me well enough to leave such a strange gift. I felt the weight of the message pressing down on me, each word a reminder that I had to figure it out before it was too late. I couldn't sleep. The thought of the clock and the cryptic message gnawed at me all night long. It felt like I was running out of time, like the clock itself was counting down to something I couldn't understand. Every creak in the house, every rustle outside, made my heart race. I found myself staring at the clock, willing it to give me some kind of answer. But it remained frozen, its hands unmoving, as though it had lost all sense of time. The next morning, I couldn't ignore the feeling any longer. I had to know more. I took the clock to a local antiques dealer, hoping he could tell me something about its origins. The man behind the counter was old, with a weathered face and a sharp gaze. When I showed him the clock, his eyes narrowed. He took it from me, running his fingers over the cracked glass as if he could feel its history. "This is an old piece," he muttered, mostly to himself. "It's from the 19th century, a rare find. But it's not just any clock. This was part of a set known as the Timekeeper's Gift." His words sent a chill down my spine. Timekeeper's Gift. I repeated, the phrase sounding like something from a forgotten legend. He nodded. It said that this set of clocks was given to certain individuals, chosen if you will. No one knows by whom, but the clocks are meant to serve as a warning. The message you received, time is running out, it's not just metaphorical, it's real. Whoever gave you that clock, they want you to understand something. I felt my breath catch in my throat. What do you mean? What am I supposed to understand? He paused, studying me for a long moment before speaking again. The clocks are said to mark an impending event, something that will change everything. The key is in the time itself, 3:15. I felt dizzy as though the room was spinning around me. What happens at 3:15? The dealer didn't answer. He simply handed me the clock back, his hands trembling ever so slightly. "You'll find out soon enough," he said, and that was all. I left the shop in a daze, the clock still in my hands, but its weight had increased tenfold. What was I supposed to do now? What did the dealer mean by "you'll find out soon enough"? I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, peering into the unknown, unable to turn away. That night, I sat by the clock once again. It was now 3 a.m. The world outside my window was quiet, too quiet, as if holding its breath along with me. At 3:15, I was certain something would happen. But when the time came, nothing changed. The clock remained frozen, its hands unmoving, its message still haunting me. But then, as I looked closer, I noticed something new. The words on the note, "Time is running out," began to fade. Slowly they disappeared, leaving behind a fresh message, "It's your turn now." I didn't know what to do. Time was still running out, but for what? The answers were slipping through my fingers like sand, and I had no idea how much time I truly had left. Story 10. I had just finished brushing my teeth when I noticed something strange in the bathroom mirror. The reflection, which was usually nothing more than a simple image of myself, now contained the faint figure of a man standing behind me. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, so I quickly turned around, expecting to see nothing. But when I looked back at the mirror, the man was still there, standing motionless with his eyes locked on mine. My heart skipped a beat, and I blinked hard, hoping the figure would disappear, but it remained. I could make out very little of his features in the dim light, only that he was wearing dark clothing, and his face was obscured in shadow. I stepped closer to the mirror, squinting to get a better look, but nothing changed. The man's presence in the reflection was unmistakable, yet there was no one in the bathroom with me. I quickly spun around again, searching the room. The bathroom was empty, just the usual fixtures and shadows cast by the weak light overhead. My pulse quickened, and I could feel a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. I looked at the mirror again, more intensely this time. The man's figure hadn't shifted, he still stood there, frozen, in perfect alignment with my own reflection. Panic set in as I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. It could be some sort of optical illusion, I thought, or perhaps the dim lighting was playing tricks on my mind. But no matter how hard I tried to dismiss it, the man remained eerily still, as if waiting for something. I reached out with trembling hands and touched the surface of the mirror, hoping to feel the cool glass beneath my fingers. But the man's reflection didn't move, and my hand came into contact with the smooth surface of the glass, just as it always had. I stepped back from the mirror, my mind racing. It was impossible. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the mirror was old, or the lighting in the bathroom was casting strange shadows. But that didn't explain the feeling creeping down my spine, the sense that something was wrong. I had to check the rest of the house. I left the bathroom, leaving the strange reflection behind, and began walking through the darkened house. My steps echoed in the silence, and each creak of the floorboard seemed unnaturally loud. I checked every room, turning on lights and looking under beds, behind curtains, and in closets. There was no sign of anyone, no strange figure lurking in the corners of my home. I tried to calm myself, telling myself that the man I saw in the mirror must have been a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination. Maybe I was just tired or stressed, but as I walked back to the bathroom, I could feel the unease rising in my chest again. What if it wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me? What if there was something more to it? When I opened the bathroom door, I hesitated before stepping inside. The mirror caught my attention immediately, and I slowly walked toward it. I didn't want to look, but I had to. When I gazed into the reflection, I saw the man once more. His figure was unchanged, standing silently behind me, his eyes staring at me with an unsettling intensity. But this time something was different. As I looked closer, I noticed that he wasn't simply standing still. The man's reflection seemed to be subtly moving, his eyes following me, his lips twitching as if he was about to speak. I took a step back, my breath caught in my throat. It was impossible. I had checked every inch of the house, and no one was there. Yet the man in the mirror remained. I raised my hand, trembling, to touch the glass again, but this time the reflection of the man mirrored my movements. He reached out too, his hand coming closer to the surface of the mirror. I recoiled, feeling a cold chill wash over me, and in that moment, the man's reflection smiled, an eerie, knowing grin that sent a wave of terror through me. I stumbled back, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. There had to be an explanation. I ran to the hallway, grabbed my phone, and called a friend, but my hands were shaking too much to dial. I needed help, someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. I texted a message instead, my fingers fumbling with the keys. I was shaking, and the text came out in a jumble of words. When I turned back to the bathroom, I could see the man's reflection in the mirror again, but this time he was no longer standing still. His figure shifted slightly, as though he were moving toward me. My pulse hammered in my chest, and I couldn't breathe. I felt trapped, unable to escape the sinister presence in the reflection. I ran to the door, slamming it shut, but the feeling of being watched remained. I stood there in the dark hallway, staring at the bathroom door, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't know what to do. Was I imagining all of this? Was my mind playing tricks on me? The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that I wasn't alone. That man, whoever he was still there, lurking in the reflection, waiting for something. I turned around, pacing the hallway, trying to make sense of it all. I thought back to the last time I had seen the bathroom mirror, the last time I had used it. It had been normal, just like any other day. There had been no strange feelings, no eerie presence. So what had changed? I couldn't stand it any longer. I had to face it, had to know what was going on. I made my way back to the bathroom door, my hands shaking as I reached for the handle. When I opened the door, I was met with the same chilling sight. The man's reflection still stood behind me, his face now illuminated by the faint glow from the light outside the bathroom. But this time I wasn't afraid. I was angry. I had no idea who or what this man was, but I wasn't going to let him scare me any longer. I stared into the mirror, determined not to look away. I wouldn't let him win. As I stood there, the reflection of the man did not move. He remained frozen, his eyes locked on mine, his grin now gone. It was as though he was waiting for me to break. But I didn't. I stayed there, staring at him, refusing to let the fear take over. And slowly, just as quickly as he had appeared, the man's reflection began to fade, the figure blurring into the mirror until there was nothing left but my own face staring back at me. I took a deep breath, finally allowing myself to relax. But as I turned away, I could have sworn I heard a whisper in the stillness of the room, a soft voice, barely audible, that said, "You'll see me again." Story 11. I woke up early one Saturday morning, the soft light of dawn creeping through the blinds. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that made every sound seem amplified. I stretched and yawned, ready to start the day. But as I stood up from my bed, something caught my eye, a faint shadow moving past my bedroom door. I froze for a moment, wondering if I had imagined it, but as the seconds passed, I realized I hadn't. There was something wrong. I quickly checked my phone, but there were no missed calls or messages. The house was still, just as it had been when I went to bed the night before. I brushed it off, thinking it was simply a trick of the light or a noise from the house settling. But then, as I walked downstairs to make my morning coffee, I saw something that made my heart stop. The front door was ajar. I never left the door unlocked, especially not at night. I had always been careful about locking up before bed. My mind raced as I thought through the possibilities. Had I forgotten to lock it last night? Maybe I had left the door slightly open, and the wind had pushed it further ajar. But as I looked closer, something felt off. The door frame showed no sign of forced entry, no marks from a break-in, yet there it was wide open. I stepped forward cautiously, my pulse quickening. I reached for the door handle, half expecting to see something or someone on the other side, but nothing. Just the empty front porch and the quiet street outside. I exhaled in relief, but the unease in my chest remained. I closed the door and double-checked the lock, my hands trembling slightly. As I turned to go back inside, something on the door caught my attention. A word. No, several words. Scrawled hastily in what appeared to be black marker were the words, "I'm closer than you think." My stomach dropped. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. How had this been written? There was no sign of anyone outside when I had checked moments ago. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The words seemed to pulse with a chilling sense of urgency. I backed away from the door, suddenly aware of the silence surrounding me. I couldn't understand how this had happened. I had locked the door the night before. No one had been in my house. The message had appeared out of nowhere. My mind raced through every possible explanation. Was it a prank? Someone trying to scare me? But that thought didn't make sense. If it was a joke, why go to such lengths? Why leave the door unlocked and write that cryptic message? I grabbed my phone and called my friend, asking if they had stopped by or if anyone had been near my house the night before. They hadn't. No one had visited, and no one had even been in the neighborhood. I felt a strange mixture of confusion and fear. How could this have happened? Who would want to leave such a message? I walked around the house, checking every window and door to make sure everything was locked. I even checked the backyard, but there was nothing unusual, just the quiet of a normal suburban morning. Yet the message on the door haunted me, its words etched into my mind like a warning I couldn't quite decipher. After a few minutes, I called the police. I told them what had happened and asked if they could send someone to check things out. The officer who answered seemed just as confused as I was, but assured me that someone would be over soon. I sat down on the couch, trying to calm myself, but my mind was in overdrive. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside made me jump. Was someone watching me? Had they been inside my house while I slept? The thought was enough to make me feel nauseous. I had no idea how long it would take for the police to arrive, so I decided to go back to the front door and inspect the message more closely. I ran my fingers over the words, trying to make sense of them. The handwriting was sloppy, almost as if whoever had written it was in a hurry. The marker was thick, as if it had been used quickly and forcefully. It was unsettling to think that someone had been so close to me, so close to my house, and I hadn't heard a thing. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. They took a look at the door, dusted for fingerprints, and examined the marker residue. One officer suggested it might have been a random prank, but I wasn't convinced. There was something about it that didn't sit right with me. No one had broken into the house, and nothing appeared to be missing, but the message itself felt far too deliberate to be a joke. "Have you had any problems recently?" the officer asked. I shook my head. "No, nothing like this before. I've lived here for years without any issues." The officer nodded, then glanced at the door again. "It could just be a random act, but we'll file a report. We'll patrol the area more often for the time being." After they left, I tried to go back to my day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The message on my door kept playing over and over in my mind. "I'm closer than you think." What did that mean? Was it a warning? A threat? Or was it simply a cruel joke designed to unsettle me? The days that followed felt strangely heavy. Every time I came home, I found myself checking the door, making sure it was locked, making sure there was nothing out of place. The message never seemed to leave my mind. It lingered in the back of my thoughts like an unspoken truth, a riddle that needed solving. But no matter how much I searched for answers, no one ever came forward. No one ever admitted to leaving that message. The police didn't find anything. The mystery of the message remained unsolved, and life slowly returned to normal, but I was forever changed. I still wonder about it sometimes, about who left that message and what it meant. The feeling of being watched, of someone being closer than you think, never fully went away. Story 12. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard its soft, barely audible, but clear enough to make my heart skip a beat. Hey, it was a whisper, and it sounded like my name. My head snapped up, my eyes scanning the room around me. The house was silent, and the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I froze, unsure of what I had just heard. I sat there for a moment, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I had been alone in the house all day, and everything seemed perfectly normal. The air was still, the shadows in the room unmoving. There was no one here to speak my name, and yet I had clearly heard it, as though someone had been standing just behind me. I got up, my legs feeling heavy as I made my way through the living room. I checked the kitchen first, my eyes quickly scanning the empty space. No one. The sink was empty, the dishes put away, and the light above the stove flickered faintly. I walked down the hallway next, peeking into the bedrooms, the bathroom, and the small laundry room. The house was still empty. I walked back to the living room, trying to brush off the unease crawling up my spine. It had to be nothing. Maybe the house was settling, or maybe I had heard a sound outside that I misinterpreted. But the whisper had been so clear, so intentional, like someone was standing right there calling my name. I shook my head, trying to rid myself of the lingering feeling that something was off. I returned to the couch, but this time, I couldn't focus on my phone. My mind kept replaying the whisper, that soft, almost melodic sound of my name. It was as if someone had been trying to get my attention. I looked around the room again, my eyes darting from corner to corner. The walls were silent, and the soft lighting in the room gave everything an almost cozy feel. But the unease remained, tugging at me from the corners of my mind. After a few moments, I tried to shake it off. "It's nothing," I muttered to myself. I had heard whispers before, especially in old houses. Sometimes the wind could make strange noises, or maybe the house itself creaked and groaned in the night. But this was different. This had been clear, deliberate. I took a deep breath and turned my attention back to the TV. Just as I started to relax, I heard it again. This time, the whisper was louder, more insistent. "Come here." It was a command, not a question, and it sent a shiver down my spine. My heart began to race, and my instincts screamed at me to get up and leave the room. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself frozen in place, my body refusing to obey the panic that was slowly rising in my chest. I stood up again, this time more slowly. My eyes darted nervously toward the hallway, where the sound had seemed to come from. I took a step forward, then another, moving cautiously as if afraid that whatever was in the other room might hear me. The air felt heavier now, almost suffocating. I could feel my pulse in my throat, the beat of my heart pounding in my ears. As I neared the hallway, I stopped, listening intently. There was nothing. The house was silent again. No whispering. No footsteps. I was alone. The realization hit me like a wave, and for a moment I considered going back to the couch and pretending like it hadn't happened. But something inside me wouldn't let go of the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone or something was waiting just around the corner. With shaky hands, I turned down the hallway, my eyes scanning the shadows of the rooms. I made my way toward the first bedroom, where the whisper had seemed to originate. I stepped inside, but the room was empty. The bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn, and the room was still. No one was there. I moved through the rest of the rooms, each one as empty as the last. The bathroom, the guest room, the small closet, it was all silent. There was no one here. I stood in the center of the house, feeling utterly stupid. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, just as I was about to head back to the living room, I heard it again. A whisper, softer this time, but unmistakably there. "Don't leave." The voice came from behind me, and this time I knew it wasn't just in my head. I spun around, my heart nearly jumping out of my chest, but the hallway was empty. No one stood there. And I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to comprehend what was happening. The house seemed to close in on me, the walls growing smaller, the air thicker. It was as though something invisible was pressing down on me, urging me to stay. But I couldn't. My instincts were telling me to leave, to get out of that house and never come back. I backed away toward the door, my breath shallow, my eyes darting nervously to every corner of the house. I wanted to call someone, but the thought of speaking to anyone, of breaking the silence, felt like it would shatter whatever fragile peace remained in the house. The whisper had stopped, but its presence lingered, like a shadow that refused to fade. I quickly grabbed my phone and stepped out onto the porch, breathing deeply in the cool air. The quiet of the outside world felt like a relief, a stark contrast to the heavy, oppressive atmosphere inside. I stood there for a while, waiting for the unease to pass. But even as the minutes stretched on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was still watching me from inside the house. I didn't go back inside that night. I stayed on the porch, trying to make sense of what had happened. The house was still, and there were no more whispers, but I couldn't forget them. I couldn't forget that feeling of being watched, of being drawn into something I didn't understand. And as I sat there, I couldn't help but wonder, if I went back in, would the whispers return? Would they call my name again? Story 13. I had always been a fan of thrifting, hunting for old treasures that could add character to my home. One Saturday, I stumbled upon an old, worn dresser at a second-hand store. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple wooden piece with brass handles, but there was something about it that caught my eye. It was relatively inexpensive, and I figured it would be a great addition to my bedroom. After haggling with the owner over the price, I loaded it into my car and drove it home, eager to give it a new life. The dresser looked out of place at first, its age and scratches standing in stark contrast to the rest of my modern furniture. But after cleaning it up and adding a fresh coat of polish, it began to look less like an antique and more like a statement piece. I placed it in the corner of my bedroom, where it stood for months, serving its intended purpose. I used it to store clothes, a few scarves, and a few odds and ends. Nothing particularly special. It was just a functional piece of furniture. One evening, after months of use, I decided to reorganize my clothes. I pulled open the bottom drawer to make space for a few new items I had recently bought. As I sifted through the clothes, I noticed something odd, a small, uneven gap at the back of the drawer. It didn't seem like a defect in the construction of the dresser, but more like a hidden compartment. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tried to pry open the hidden space, but it was stubborn, as if something was wedged inside. I grabbed a small butter knife from the kitchen and gently slid it into the gap, trying to pry it open without damaging the wood. After a few minutes of careful pressure, the compartment finally gave way. The back of the drawer creaked, and a small section of the wood slid away, revealing a space that had been sealed off for who knows how long. Inside, there was a small stack of faded photographs. They were neatly stacked, as though someone had deliberately hidden them there. I pulled the stack out cautiously, feeling a chill run through me as I examined the first photo. The photograph was old, its edges yellowed and frayed. It showed a family, 2 adults and 2 children standing in front of a house I didn't recognize. The faces were somewhat blurry, likely due to the passage of time, but I could make out the faint outline of their smiles. The adults looked like they were in their 30s, while the children appeared to be around 10 or 12. There was something unsettling about the way they looked at the camera, their eyes almost too intense, too knowing for a simple family portrait. I turned the photo over, hoping to find a name or some kind of clue, but it was blank. I examined the rest of the photographs, each one equally old and equally mysterious. There were no names, no dates, just images of people I had never seen before. Some of the photos were of individuals, men, women, and children standing in various outdoor settings, while others were taken indoors, capturing moments of everyday life. What struck me the most was how familiar each person looked, even though I was certain I had never met them. It was as if their faces had been etched into my memory, like ghosts that had always been there. The more I looked at the photographs, the more unsettled I became. Each image seemed to pull me deeper into its mystery. There was one photo that particularly stood out, an image of a young woman standing in front of a large, ornate door. Her expression was one of deep contemplation, and her eyes seemed to follow me as I stared at the photo. It was uncanny. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen her somewhere before, but I couldn't place her. I set the photographs aside, the weight of their unknown origins pressing down on me. I spent the rest of the evening pacing around my apartment, my mind racing with questions. How had these photographs ended up in the dresser? Who were these people? And most importantly, why were they hidden away? I tried to push the unease aside, but it lingered, gnawing at me as I tried to sleep. The next morning, I returned to the photographs, hoping to find some explanation. I spent hours looking through them, examining the smallest details. Nothing about them seemed to make sense. It was as if they belonged to a different time, a different life, one that had never intersected with mine. I tried to Google the names of the houses in the photos, hoping to find something that would explain their presence, but no matter how much I searched, I found nothing. Days passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I began to notice odd things happening around the dresser. Objects would be misplaced, things would go missing, and sometimes I could have sworn I heard soft whispers late at night, as if the photographs were calling out to me. At first I brushed it off as my imagination, but the strange occurrences continued. It was as if the dresser had become a magnet for weirdness, pulling me further into its mystery. I reached out to a local historian, hoping that someone might be able to shed light on the photographs. I showed him the pictures, and he seemed equally baffled. He didn't recognize any of the houses or faces in the photos, but he did suggest that they might have been taken in the late 1800s or early 1900s, based on the style of clothing. He mentioned that it was not uncommon for families to hide personal items in furniture during times of upheaval, but that still didn't explain who these people were or why their photos had ended up in my dresser. I began to feel a sense of dread every time I looked at the dresser. The more I tried to learn about its past, the more it seemed to resist any answers. One night, as I was about to retire to bed, I noticed something odd. One of the photographs, the one of the young woman in front of the door, was missing. I searched the entire apartment, tearing through drawers and shelves, but I couldn't find it. It was as if the photo had vanished into thin air. That was the last straw. I couldn't keep the dresser any longer. I had to get rid of it. The next morning, I loaded it into my car and drove to a local thrift store, hoping to pass it off to someone else. As I handed over the dresser to the store owner, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if I had finally let go of something that had been holding me captive. But as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. It was another photograph, lying in the display window of the store. I walked over slowly, and to my shock, I recognized the same woman from the photo there standing in front of the door. The photo was exactly the same, only now it was in someone else's hands. I felt my heart race as I backed away, realizing that the mystery of the hidden compartment was far from over. Somehow, the photographs were still following me. Story 14. I had just settled into my favorite armchair, the kind that molded perfectly to my body, with a cup of tea in hand. The quiet of the evening wrapped around me like a warm blanket as the soft glow of the streetlights outside filtered in through the window. It was a peaceful night, the kind that made me feel safe in my own home. But that tranquility was shattered in an instant when I saw him, a man standing directly in front of my window, staring at me. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a shadow or a reflection. I blinked, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But no, he was still there, his face pressed up against the glass, his eyes locked onto mine with an unnerving intensity. The man didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even seem to breathe. He just stood there, staring at me as if waiting for something. My heart skipped a beat, a cold shiver running down my spine. I quickly looked away, feeling my chest tighten in fear. Who was he? How long had he been standing there? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was lost, or perhaps a neighbor had mistakenly wandered too close to my window. But none of those excuses made sense. There was something wrong about the way he was standing, something unnatural in the stillness of his posture. I must have been staring at him for a solid minute, unable to look away. Then, as if in response to the fear bubbling up inside me, I blinked. It was a simple, involuntary action, but when my eyes opened again, the man was gone. I rushed to the window, pulling back the curtains to see if he had moved to another spot. But there was nothing. The front yard was empty, the street silent except for the hum of distant traffic. I felt a rush of relief, my breath coming out in a shaky exhale. Maybe it had been a figment of my imagination, or perhaps I had been seeing things in the fading light. I tried to convince myself of that, but something wasn't sitting right. I still felt his presence, as if he was still out there, watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the man had never really left. I paced around the room, trying to distract myself. The TV was on, but the sound of it barely registered in my mind. My eyes kept darting toward the window, as though expecting to see him standing there again. I checked the locks on the doors, making sure everything was secure, but the unease inside me refused to dissipate. What was I supposed to do now? Call the police. But what would I even say? I saw a man outside my window, and now he's gone. It seemed ridiculous. I decided to go to bed, hoping a good night's sleep would help me shake off the lingering feeling of dread. But as soon as I turned off the lights and crawled under the covers, my mind refused to quiet. The image of the man's face, pale and unmoving, haunted me. I kept wondering if he was still out there, waiting. It was like a bad dream, except I knew it was real. I managed to doze off eventually, but my sleep was fitful, interrupted by strange, vivid dreams. In one, I was walking through a forest, the trees closing in around me, and I could hear footsteps behind me, someone following me, always just out of sight. I woke up at the start, my heart racing. I glanced around the dark room, disoriented. The room was still, but I could feel the same sense of unease that had plagued me since I saw the man outside. I couldn't go back to sleep after that, so I got out of bed and made my way to the kitchen, hoping to distract myself with something to eat. The silence of the house seemed oppressive, as though it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As I stood there, waiting for the kettle to boil, I heard a soft tap at the window. I froze. My heart skipped a beat, and I slowly turned toward the sound. I couldn't see anything from where I stood, but I knew where it had come from. The front window. The very place where I had seen the man standing earlier. I stood still, waiting, listening. Another tap, softer this time, as though someone was tapping their fingers lightly against the glass. I felt my skin crawl. There was no way this was a coincidence. Someone was out there, and I wasn't imagining it. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and crept toward the window, my heart thudding in my chest. I peered outside, half expecting to see that same man standing there, staring at me with his unblinking eyes. But the yard was empty again, just as it had been before. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I scanned the area, my flashlight beam slicing through the dark. Nothing. No sign of anyone, no movement at all. I sighed in relief, but the nagging feeling remained, a heavy weight pressing on my chest. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the tapping could have been something else, maybe a branch or the wind, but I knew deep down that wasn't the case. I decided to call it a night, locking all the windows and doors and sitting in bed, wide awake. The house felt different now, somehow. The air felt thicker, the silence more oppressive. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that the man was still out there watching me. The next morning I tried to go about my day as usual, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing just behind me. I couldn't concentrate at work, couldn't focus on anything other than the image of the man staring at me through the window. Had it been real, or had I imagined it? That night, I decided to stay with a friend, just to get away from the house for a while. I wasn't sure if I was being irrational, but I couldn't bring myself to stay alone again. As I left the house, I glanced at the front window one last time. The blinds were drawn, the house quiet, but I knew deep down that the man would be back. Story 15. It started innocently enough, or at least I tried to convince myself of that. The first time I noticed him, I didn't think much of it. I was getting into my car after a long shift, the usual exhaustion hanging heavy in my limbs. That's when I saw him standing in the far corner of the parking lot, watching me. I shook it off, thinking maybe he was waiting for someone, or just passing by. But when I glanced back a few seconds later, he was still there, his gaze fixed on me like he was studying my every move. The next day, he was there again, standing in the same spot. This time I didn't even need to get out of my car to see him. As soon as I started the engine, I saw him in the corner of my eye. He wasn't just lingering, he was watching me intently, his hands tucked in his pockets. The way he stood, rigid and unmoving, sent a chill down my spine. I tried to ignore him, telling myself it was just a coincidence. But that night I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. For the next several days, the pattern continued. Every time I left work, he was there. Sometimes I'd spot him before I even reached my car, and other times I'd see him from behind the tinted windows. I began to feel trapped in that parking lot, as if I had no escape from his watchful eyes. I tried to brush it off, rationalizing that maybe he was harmless, that maybe he was just waiting for someone, or maybe he had some sort of job nearby. But something inside me told me that wasn't the case. One afternoon I arrived at my car to find him standing even closer than usual. His gaze never wavered, and I could see his face now. It was gaunt, almost hollow, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. I couldn't breathe. 1,000 questions flooded my mind and panic set in. Why was he there? What did he want? I told myself I had to confront him. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when every part of me screamed that it wasn't. I walked toward him, trying to keep my cool despite the pounding of my heart. My steps were slow, deliberate, but as I got closer, I could feel my knees shaking. When I finally reached him, I took a deep breath and forced myself to speak. "Why are you always here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but my words came out a little more desperate than I intended. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he simply stared at me, his eyes never leaving my face. It felt like he was studying me, sizing me up in some strange way. His lips curled into a smile, but there was something off about it. It wasn't a friendly smile, not by any stretch. It was cold, like he knew something I didn't. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat, and my heart raced faster. "I don't know what you want," I said, trying to sound more confident, "but this isn't normal. You can't keep doing this." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "I'm just watching," he said, his voice flat, almost mechanical. There was no emotion in it, no reason behind it, just those two words, watching. I stood frozen, not knowing how to respond. He didn't move, didn't try to explain himself further. His eyes were locked on mine, unblinking, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was enjoying my discomfort. And then, without another word, he turned and walked away. I watched him leave, his footsteps slow and deliberate, until he disappeared into the shadows of the building. I stood there for several moments, trying to gather my thoughts. I had confronted him, but I didn't feel relieved. Instead, the knot in my stomach only grew tighter. What did he mean by watching? What did he want from me? I could barely wrap my mind around it. The next day, I found myself dreading the parking lot. I told myself I had done the right thing by confronting him, but the thought of seeing him again made my skin crawl. When I arrived at work, I tried to stay focused, tried to push the fear to the back of my mind. But when I stepped outside to leave at the end of the day, my heart sank. There he was again, standing just as he always did, watching me from across the lot. This time, his gaze seemed even more intense, more predatory. I couldn't take it anymore. I rushed to my car, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. I was so focused on getting away from him that I didn't even realize how fast I was moving. But as I slammed the car door shut and started the engine, I looked in my rearview mirror to find that he had already moved closer, his figure barely visible in the reflection. My breath caught in my throat. How had he gotten there so quickly? I hadn't seen him move. In the days that followed, he continued to show up as if nothing had changed. He never spoke again. He never did anything more than stand there, watching. but each time I left work I could feel his presence like a weight on my chest, suffocating me. I started taking different routes home, hoping to avoid him, but it was always the same. He was always there, waiting, watching. The longer it went on, the more I began to feel like a prisoner in my own life. One evening I decided I couldn't keep living in fear. I called the police, explained everything that had happened, and asked them to do something. The officer on the phone assured me they would patrol the area, but he didn't sound convinced. I could hear the skepticism in his voice. After all, this man had never done anything outright illegal. He hadn't touched me, hadn't said anything threatening. But the officer promised they would keep an eye out. The next day, when I walked out of the building, I saw him again. But this time, something was different. The moment our eyes met, I saw the faintest glimmer of recognition. He didn't smile this time. Instead, he turned and walked away, just as he had the first time. As I stood there, watching him disappear into the distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wouldn't be the last time he would show up. And somehow, that scared me more than anything else. Story 16. The night was calm as I went to bed, my usual routine in place. I turned on the bedroom light, a soft yellow glow that comforted me as I read a few chapters of a book. After setting the book aside, I turned off the lamp and crawled into bed, the light fading into the shadows. It was an uneventful night, and I drifted off into a deep sleep, unaware that something unusual was about to happen. When I woke up the next morning, everything felt normal at first. The sun was barely rising, casting soft morning light through the curtains. As I stretched and reached for the bedside lamp, I noticed something odd. The bedroom light that I had left on before going to bed was now off. I froze for a moment, staring at the darkened bulb, my mind racing. I was sure I had turned it on before lying down. There was no way I had simply forgotten. I swung my legs off the bed and walked to the light switch, flipping it up to see if the bulb would come back on. But nothing happened. The switch seemed fine and the light stayed off. I stepped closer to the light bulb, feeling a strange sense of unease. The bulb itself was still warm to the touch, despite being off. I couldn't understand how it could be warm when it hadn't been on for hours. It was as though the light had been recently turned off, even though I had never touched it after going to bed. Confused, I checked the rest of the room, trying to rationalize what was going on. Maybe the light had a faulty switch, or perhaps the bulb had some kind of malfunction. But nothing seemed right. The rest of the room was as it should be, undisturbed. The air was still, and nothing felt out of place. It was just the light that seemed to have a life of its own. I stood there for a long moment, the eerie silence around me growing louder in my ears, before I finally turned away and went to the kitchen to get some breakfast, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. Throughout the day, I couldn't stop thinking about the light. It lingered in my mind, as if the mystery of it refused to let me go. It wasn't just the fact that it had turned off, it was the warmth of the bulb. The way it seemed to contradict everything I knew about electricity. The more I thought about it, the more I wondered if something strange was happening. Could it have been a simple malfunction, or was there something more to it? I couldn't help but feel as if I was missing something crucial, like a piece of a puzzle that I couldn't quite place. That night, I was determined to find an answer. I decided to leave the bedroom light on again before going to bed, just to see what would happen. The room felt the same, calm and quiet, with the light casting its familiar glow across the walls. I told myself that it was probably nothing, a quirk of the electrical system, or perhaps just my imagination running wild. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more at play. I turned off the light and climbed into bed, my mind racing with questions. The next morning, I woke up to the same strange sight. The light was off again. I could feel my heart begin to race as I got up, my eyes locked on the switch. This time, I didn't just flip the switch back on. I stood there, my hand hovering over it, trying to make sense of what was happening. There was no way the light could have turned off by itself. Yet it had, and the bulb was still warm, like it had been recently switched off. The same sensation of unease washed over me, stronger than before. It was as if the room itself was playing some kind of trick on me. I called a friend later that day, explaining the strange occurrence. They seemed skeptical at first, suggesting it could just be a coincidence, or maybe I was forgetting to turn the light off at night. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The warmth of the bulb, the way it seemed to be off without any explanation, it wasn't a simple mistake. Something was happening, something I couldn't explain. They offered to come over and help, but I wasn't sure what they could do. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had to figure this out on my own. That night, I decided to try something different. I left the light on again, but this time I placed a camera on my nightstand, pointing directly at the light. I wanted to see what happened while I slept. I hoped that the footage would reveal some kind of explanation, maybe catching a glimpse of a flickering light or an electrical issue that I hadn't noticed. As I lay in bed, the light burned brightly, casting long shadows across the room. I tried to relax, but the anticipation gnawed at me. Would I wake up again to find the light off? Or would something else happen? The following morning, I jumped out of bed as soon as I opened my eyes, rushing to check the camera footage. My heart was pounding in my chest as I scrolled through the video, watching the room as I slept. At first, everything seemed normal. The light stayed on as I lay in bed, the glow illuminating the room. But as the footage continued, I noticed something strange. The light began to flicker, almost imperceptibly at first. It was so subtle that I almost missed it. Then, in an instant, the light shut off completely, just as if someone had flipped the switch. I froze, rewinding the footage to watch it again, but no one had entered the room. No one had touched the switch. The light had just turned off by itself. I stared at the screen in disbelief. I was no closer to understanding what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it wasn't normal. The light had a life of its own, something that went beyond simple electricity or malfunction. It was as if the room itself was trying to communicate something that I couldn't grasp. The cold unease that had followed me since the first night settled in again, deeper this time. The mystery of the light was far from over, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was just the beginning. Story 17. At first, I thought it was just a glitch. My phone was old, and it had been acting up lately. Every time I plugged it into the charger, the screen would flicker to life on its own, even though I hadn't touched it. I would roll my eyes and chalk it up to the phone's age and all the wear and tear it had endured over the years. But then the messages started. It started with something small. I plugged the charger into the phone and the usual flicker occurred, but this time the screen didn't go black again as it normally did. Instead, a message appeared: "You can't escape." My fingers froze on the plug, a sense of unease creeping up my spine. I checked to make sure it was my phone, wondering if somehow someone had sent me the message remotely. But there was no indication of who the sender was, and the message just sat there, as if it was written by the phone itself. I pulled the charger out, and the phone immediately shut off. I sighed, thinking it was just a random glitch, some weird software bug that would eventually fix itself. I didn't tell anyone about it, brushing it off as a freak occurrence. But when I plugged the phone back in to charge later that night, it happened again. This time, the screen displayed a different message you can't hide. The text was strange, too personal, too direct. My heart started to race. I unplugged the phone, unsure of what to think. I checked every setting on the phone, thinking maybe there was an app or a feature I had unknowingly activated. But everything looked normal. I checked the charger too, wondering if maybe it had a malfunction or some sort of hidden function that was causing these messages. But no, everything seemed fine. The charger worked like it always had. I couldn't explain what was happening. The next day, I tried again. This time, when I plugged the phone in, I waited to see what would happen. The screen lit up as usual, but before I could look away, another message appeared: "You're mine." It wasn't a glitch anymore. It felt deliberate. The words were cold, menacing, and seemed to be directed at me. A feeling of dread settled in my chest, and I couldn't shake the sensation that someone or something was watching me. I unplugged the phone again, pacing around the room, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was some kind of malicious software, perhaps a virus I had unknowingly downloaded. But that didn't make sense. Why would it only happen when I plugged in the charger? And why were the messages so specific? I couldn't figure it out. My mind raced as I tried to piece together any explanation, but nothing made sense. The messages kept coming, each one more chilling than the last. "You can't run. You're never alone. I know where you are." Each message sent a wave of terror through me, but no matter what I did, it wouldn't stop. I tried factory resetting the phone, thinking that would wipe whatever malicious software had taken over, but it didn't work. The next time I plugged it in, the same messages appeared. The phone was no longer acting like it was malfunctioning. It was like it had a mind of its own, and it was targeting me. I grew paranoid. I started avoiding the charger altogether, using the phone only when absolutely necessary. But that didn't stop the messages from coming. One morning I woke up to find a new message on my phone. "I'm already here." My skin crawled. The phone had been on my nightstand, and there was no way anyone could have accessed it while I was asleep. I had locked the door before going to bed, and there was no sign of anyone breaking in. I decided to stop charging the phone altogether, thinking that if I removed the charger from the equation, the messages would stop. But even without charging it, the phone would sometimes turn on by itself, displaying more cryptic texts. "I'm never leaving. You will never escape." I felt trapped. I couldn't escape this nightmare. No matter what I did, the phone was alive with these unsettling messages. I began to lose sleep, my mind fraying at the edges. I couldn't figure out how to stop it. No matter how many times I checked the settings, no matter how many times I reset the phone, it kept happening. It felt like the phone was actively trying to communicate with me, manipulating me. Each time the messages appeared, I grew more and more frightened. What if it was something beyond just a glitch or a virus? What if someone was trying to get to me, or worse, what if the phone itself had become something sinister? I did some research online, hoping to find some explanation. It turned out that other people had experienced similar occurrences, though the details varied. Some described their phones turning on by themselves. Others mentioned receiving strange, threatening messages. The stories were the same, unexplained, terrifying, and beyond comprehension, but none of the articles gave a concrete explanation. There was no definitive answer to what was happening. All I knew was that I wasn't the only one who was experiencing this. I tried one last thing. I decided to visit a repair shop, hoping that a professional could fix the problem. When I explained what was happening, the technician's face went pale. He told me he had heard rumors of phones becoming haunted, though he quickly dismissed it as superstition. He tried to take my phone in to investigate, but when he plugged it into the charger, the same thing happened. The screen flickered to life with the message, "I told you, you can't escape." The technician backed away, eyes wide with fear. He handed the phone back to me, clearly unnerved. "I've never seen anything like this," he said quietly. "You should probably get rid of it." I left the shop in a daze, my hands shaking as I held the phone. But when I got home, I realized something. I didn't want to get rid of it. I couldn't. It had become a part of me, somehow like it had control over me. Every time I tried to disconnect from it, it found a way back. No matter how many times I unplugged it, no matter how far I pushed it away, it always returned. The messages kept coming, each one more menacing than the last, and no matter what I did, I couldn't stop it. Story 18. I had always been a collector of books, each one carefully placed on the shelves that lined my living room. Some were novels, others were old manuals or discarded relics from secondhand stores. But that evening, as I was dusting the shelves and rearranging my collection, I stumbled upon something unusual. A thick, leather-bound book that I hadn't noticed before seemed out of place among the others. Curious, I pulled it out from its spot. When I opened the book, I immediately noticed that it wasn't filled with pages of text. Instead, there was a hollowed-out cavity in the center, like a secret compartment. Inside, nestled against the pages, was a small, old-fashioned key. It was intricately designed, with a brass sheen that had dulled with age. There was no label or engraving on it, no indication of what it might open. My fingers brushed over its smooth surface, and for a brief moment I felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if I had seen it before. I turned the book over in my hands, trying to make sense of the hidden key. It seemed absurd that someone would go through the trouble of hollowing out a book just to hide a key inside it. My mind raced with questions. Why was it hidden there? Who had placed it there? And for what purpose? I tried to remember if I had ever seen this book in my collection before, but nothing came to mind. It was as if it appeared out of nowhere, yet the key felt strangely familiar, almost as though it had been waiting for me to find it. I set the book and the key down on the coffee table and sat back in my chair, contemplating what to do next. I examined the key again, noting its intricate design. It was small, delicate, and ornate, unlike any modern key I had ever seen. There were no markings on it, nothing to give me a clue about what it opened. The more I stared at it, the more I felt a pull, a sensation that I needed to discover its purpose. But where would I even begin looking for whatever it might unlock? The next few days passed in a blur, and the key sat on my table, taunting me. I couldn't focus on anything else. My thoughts kept drifting back to it. What if it was meant for something important? What if it was a key to a hidden room or a secret compartment somewhere in the house? My curiosity began to grow, and I found myself searching through every room, every drawer, and every closet, looking for a lock that might match the key. But there was nothing. I spent hours going through my old furniture, inspecting every crevice, every inch of the walls, but nothing seemed to fit. I even checked the locks on all the doors in the house, but none of them seemed like they would accept the key. Frustration began to build inside me. How could something so small hold so much power over my thoughts? Every night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining where the key might belong. It was as if the key had become a puzzle that I had to solve, and every failed attempt to find its match made me more determined. One afternoon, as I was clearing out some old boxes from the attic, I found something that made my heart race. Buried beneath old papers and forgotten trinkets, I discovered a small wooden box with an ornate lock. The moment I saw it, I knew without a doubt that it was the lock the key had been made for. The key fit perfectly into the lock, turning smoothly as if it had always belonged there. A wave of excitement washed over me, and I carefully lifted the lid of the box. Inside was a stack of old letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. The letters appeared to be from a time long past, the ink faded and the paper brittle. I gently picked up the top letter, my hands trembling slightly as I read the delicate script. It was addressed to someone named Thomas, but the contents were a mystery. The letter spoke of a secret that had been hidden for generations, a treasure that could only be unlocked by someone who truly understood its meaning. The more I read, the more intrigued I became. There was a mention of a family heirloom, a powerful artifact, and a cryptic message about finding the key to unlock the past. As I read through the letters, I began to piece together a story that seemed almost too unbelievable to be true. According to the letters, the key had been passed down through generations, each owner guarding it until the time was right for it to be used. The box had been hidden away for safekeeping, and the key had been placed in the book, waiting for someone who could uncover its secrets. The letters described a hidden legacy, a family treasure that had been lost to time, and the key was the only thing that could bring it back to light. I sat back, stunned, as the full weight of the discovery settled over me. The key was not just a random object, but a piece of a larger puzzle. It was a key to the past, a key that unlocked not just a box, but a long-buried secret that had been hidden away for centuries. I felt a rush of excitement mixed with a sense of responsibility. The letters spoke of an ancient treasure, but they didn't say where it was hidden. The key had led me to this box, but now I had to find the next piece of the puzzle. As I sat there, surrounded by the faded letters and the small wooden box, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. What was this treasure? And why had it been kept hidden for so long? I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just scratched the surface of something much larger, something that could change everything I knew. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that finding the treasure wouldn't be as simple as unlocking a box. It was a journey, one that would take me into the past, into a world of secrets and mysteries I could never have imagined. The key had opened more than just a box, it had opened a door to a world of unknowns. And now, there was no turning back. Story 19. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone when the sudden buzz of an incoming call broke the silence. It was an unfamiliar number at first, but then I noticed the name on the screen, my mother's number. I immediately swiped to answer, expecting to hear her cheerful voice on the other end, but instead there was nothing but a chilling silence. I waited for a moment, thinking maybe it was a bad connection, but the silence stretched on, unnerving and uncomfortable. I called back immediately, hoping to catch her before something was wrong. But each time the phone rang, it went straight to voicemail. I tried again and again, the same result. I left a message telling her to call me back, but something felt off. My heart began to race as I dialed once more, hoping to hear her voice, but the phone remained eerily silent. I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling like I was on the edge of something I couldn't understand. I tried texting her, but my fingers hesitated over the keys. What could I say? The text felt too impersonal, too distant for the unease that had settled in my chest. I typed out a simple message, "Mom, are you okay?" and hit send. But as I waited for a reply, a sense of dread began to grow inside me. It wasn't like her to be unreachable, to ignore calls or messages. And yet, that's exactly what was happening. I stood up, pacing the room as I thought through every possible explanation. Maybe her phone was acting up, maybe she'd accidentally hit a wrong button, Or maybe she was just busy. But none of these reasons felt right. There was an odd sense of finality in the silence, as though something important had been lost between the calls. My mind began to race, jumping to more disturbing possibilities. What if something had happened to her? What if she needed me and I couldn't get to her in time? The minutes dragged by, and with each passing second, my worry deepened. I checked the time. Almost an hour had passed since I first tried to reach her. It was unlike my mother to leave me hanging like this, especially without any sign of life from her phone. I felt the growing pressure in my chest, the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. I could no longer sit still. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, ready to drive to her house and check on her in person. As I drove through the dark streets, my thoughts continued to spiral. My mother lived just a few miles away, and the drive was short, but every minute felt like an eternity. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white from the tension. What if something had happened while I wasn't there? What if this wasn't just a simple mistake, but something worse? When I finally arrived at her house, I rushed up the driveway, my heart pounding. I knocked on the door, hoping she'd be inside, sitting on the couch with a cup of tea, completely oblivious to the worry she'd caused me. But there was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time, but still nothing. My anxiety spiked, and I quickly checked the windows. Her car was parked in the driveway, so she had to be home. I tried the door handle, relieved to find it unlocked. I stepped inside, calling her name. "Mom? Are you here?" The house was quiet, too quiet. I walked from room to room, checking each one, but there was no sign of her. My heart dropped as I reached her bedroom and found it empty, the bed neatly made. The silence felt suffocating, and my mind screamed with questions that I couldn't answer. I pulled out my phone again, quickly dialing her number for the umpteenth time, hoping this time I'd hear her voice. But once again it went straight to voicemail. I texted her again, this time more urgently, "Mom, where are you?" No reply. I was about to leave the house and start searching the neighborhood when something strange caught my eye. On the kitchen counter, there was a small piece of paper. It wasn't something I recognized, and it looked like it had been left there recently. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and read the simple message written on it. "I'm sorry. I had to leave." The handwriting was unmistakable, my mother's. My heart skipped a beat. But what did it mean? Why would she leave a note without saying anything to me first? I stood there for a moment, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them making sense. The note didn't fit the picture of my mother I had in my mind. It was too brief, too cold. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, and the oppressive feeling of being watched crept over me once again. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important, something I should have noticed sooner. I walked back to the living room, staring at the phone in my hand. My mind kept returning to the strange call I had received earlier. The silence on the line had been deafening, and it felt like it had come from a place that was far beyond a simple phone glitch. It was as though the call had been a warning or an omen. The voice on the other end, though silent, had carried a message that I couldn't decipher, yet I knew it was there. My mother's phone had stopped ringing after that call. I hadn't received any more notifications, no messages from her number. I went back to the note, rereading it over and over, each time feeling a growing sense of panic in my chest. There had to be some explanation, something I wasn't seeing, but what? I called the police, my voice shaking as I explained the situation. They arrived quickly, taking my statement and asking if there had been any previous incidents or signs of trouble. I told them no, Nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened. But this was different. The officers were kind, but their faces were grim as they began their search. As the hours passed, my mother remained unaccounted for, and the police found no evidence of foul play, but something still didn't sit right. The unanswered call from her phone, the eerie note, and her sudden disappearance all seemed connected. There was no explanation, only a chilling silence that hung in the air. Story 20. It was a quiet night when the security system went off, the shrill sound of the alarm jolting me awake. I scrambled to my feet, heart racing as the flashing red lights illuminated the dark room. My mind raced through 1,000 possibilities: burglars, a malfunction, something I couldn't even comprehend. I grabbed my phone, quickly checking the security cameras that were scattered around the house, hoping to see something that would explain the disturbance. The cameras showed everything as it should be. The front door was still locked, the windows were secure, and nothing moved in the yard. I scrolled through the footage again, each feed looking as normal as the last. No sign of an intruder, no shadowy figures lurking by the door, not even a car passing by the street. It was as if the alarm had gone off for no reason at all. But the uneasy feeling in my stomach refused to subside. I walked through the house, checking each room as I went. The stillness was unsettling, too quiet, almost as if the house itself were holding its breath. Everything seemed normal, the living room untouched, the kitchen clean, and the hallway dimly lit by the nightlight. Still, there was something off. The coldness in the air was palpable, creeping around me like a shadow, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I couldn't explain it, but it felt as if something was out of place. I returned to the living room, where the alarmed silence had settled in, but the unease remained. The house felt different, almost like it was no longer just mine. I checked the security system again, confirming that no doors or windows had been breached, no motion detected outside. It made no sense. If nothing was wrong, why did I feel this way? The coldness seemed to grow, as if the temperature had dropped by several degrees in mere moments. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to shake off the creeping discomfort, but it lingered like a presence in the room. It was like being watched, only there was no one there. I checked the cameras once more, but the same footage played on the screen. Nothing had changed. Everything was still. I decided to go outside to reassure myself that there was nothing unusual in the yard, that no one had broken in. Maybe the night air would clear my mind. Stepping onto the porch, I immediately felt the chill in the air. It wasn't just cold, it was unnaturally cold, like something was draining the warmth from the world around me. I stood there for a moment, staring out into the dark yard, but there was no sign of movement. No animals rustling in the bushes, no cars driving by. Everything was still. But as I turned to head back inside, I froze. In the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a shadow move across the driveway. I turned my head sharply, but there was nothing there, just the empty driveway and the dark street beyond. I felt my pulse quicken, and a part of me wanted to rush inside, lock the door, and forget this strange feeling. But another part urged me to investigate, to find out what was causing this unease. I walked to the side of the house, shining a flashlight along the walls and down the length of the yard. Every corner was empty. There was nothing there. I checked the back fence to make sure it was still secure, then scanned the area around the garage, but again there was nothing. No movement, no sign of anything that could have triggered the alarm. Still, that cold sensation lingered, gnawing at me from the inside. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. My breath came out in shallow bursts as I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me. The moment I stepped through the threshold, I felt the temperature rise slightly, but the unease remained. Something was wrong. I couldn't explain it, but I felt as if the house were no longer the safe, familiar place it had always been. I went back to the living room, checking the cameras again. There was nothing new to see. No intruders, no sign of anything out of the ordinary. Yet the coldness in the air only grew stronger, as if something or someone was standing just behind me, watching. I turned slowly, half expecting to see someone standing in the doorway, but the room was empty. There was no one there. I went back to my bedroom, trying to convince myself that I was simply tired, that the alarm had triggered for some unknown reason, and my mind was playing tricks on me. I climbed into bed, pulling the covers tightly around me, but sleep wouldn't come. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside made my heart race. I closed my eyes, hoping to drift off, but the coldness in the room made it impossible. The sound of the wind outside grew louder, and I could hear the faint scraping of something against the walls, as if something was trying to get in. My pulse raced as I listened, straining to hear over the silence. There was no mistaking it now, the sound was real. It was too precise to be the wind. I jumped out of bed, grabbing my phone again, ready to check the security cameras once more. But this time, when I opened the app, the feed was black. The camera views were frozen, no longer showing the empty house I knew. I tapped frantically, trying to get a glimpse of something, anything. But the screen stayed blank, offering no comfort, no explanation. A chill ran down my spine as the coldness in the room grew more intense. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the house, slow, deliberate, and impossibly loud. My heart pounded in my chest as I froze, listening intently. The footsteps seemed to come closer, but I could see no one. The house was empty. There were no intruders, no signs of anyone being inside. But the footsteps continued, and they were unmistakably real. I moved toward the door, my breath shallow, every instinct telling me to run. But before I could make it to the hallway, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. The coldness intensified, as if the very air around me had become thick and suffocating. I stumbled back, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone. But the footsteps continued, getting louder, closer, until I could feel them just behind me. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. The coldness disappeared, and the air seemed to return to normal. I was left standing in the dark, unsure of what had just happened. The silence was deafening, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been there was still watching me. I checked the security system one last time. The feed was still black. Everything was still, but the unease lingered, as if the house itself had changed, and it wasn't my home anymore. Story 21. I had just returned home after a long day at work. The streets outside were quiet, and the soft glow of the streetlights filtered through my windows. As I unlocked the front door, I noticed something strange. The atmosphere in the house felt different, as though something was slightly off. It was subtle, but it made me uneasy. I shrugged it off, attributing the feeling to exhaustion. The house was as I had left it, neat, peaceful, and unassuming. But as I moved further into the living room, I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. The attic door, which I had always left open, was now locked. I stared at it for a few moments, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't like me to lock it, and I certainly didn't remember doing it before I left. The door had always remained ajar, just the way I liked it. I approached the door cautiously, my heart beginning to race. I had never locked it before, and it was odd to think I would have done so without remembering. There was no sign of anyone else having been in the house, but the locked door suggested otherwise. I ran my fingers along the edges of the door frame, looking for any clues, scratches, smudges, anything that might indicate a forced entry, but there was nothing. The door was in perfect condition. I turned to the nearby hallway, but nothing seemed out of place. The rest of the house was silent, as it usually was when I returned home. My mind wandered to the possibility that I had simply forgotten to unlock it before I left, but that didn't sit well with me either. I was certain that I would have remembered if I had locked it. And yet, here I was staring at a door that I couldn't explain. I tried the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. The lock was secure. I stepped back and considered the situation. My next thought was to retrieve the key from its usual spot on top of the kitchen cabinet. But when I went to grab it, my stomach sank. The key was missing. I checked again, hoping I had just overlooked it, but the key was nowhere to be found. A sense of dread began to settle over me. I had never lost the key, and I had never needed to lock the attic door before. The whole situation felt wrong. I walked back to the door, examining the lock once again. The keyhole was clean, as if it hadn't been used in ages. It didn't make sense. I had always left the attic door unlocked, and the key had always been in its place. I began to wonder if someone had entered the house in my absence, locked the door, and taken the key. But the thought made me shiver. If someone had been inside, why hadn't I heard anything? And why would they have locked the attic door and taken the key? The attic wasn't a place that anyone would typically visit. I stood there for a long moment, trying to come up with an explanation. The house was still quiet, but there was a weight to the silence now, a heaviness that made me feel exposed. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I went back to the living room and tried to distract myself, but my thoughts kept returning to the attic. I couldn't understand why anyone would lock the door or take the key. It made no sense. After a while, I decided to call a locksmith to see if they could help. I didn't want to risk breaking the door or damaging the lock, especially if someone else had been in the house. The locksmith arrived later that evening and took a quick look at the door. He couldn't find anything unusual about the lock itself, and after a few attempts, he managed to open it. As he turned the handle and pushed the door open, a rush of cool air escaped from the attic, making me shiver. I stepped into the attic, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was dark, save for the dim light from the hallway. The attic was just as I remembered it. Old furniture, boxes stacked high, and the faint smell of dust in the air. Nothing appeared to be out of place. I walked around inspecting every corner, but there were no signs of disturbance. It was as if no one had been up there at all. I checked the window, but it was firmly closed. There were no footprints or marks in the dust that covered the floor. If someone had been up there, they had done an excellent job of covering their tracks. I felt a wave of frustration. I had hoped that the attic would provide some answers, but it only raised more questions. Who had locked the door, and why? As I stood there, trying to make sense of everything, I noticed something odd. On the far side of the attic, tucked behind a stack of old boxes, was a small, unfamiliar object. It was a piece of paper, crumpled and partially hidden beneath a wooden crate. I bent down to pick it up and unfolded it carefully. The paper was yellowed and torn at the edges. It appeared to be an old letter. I read the letter, my eyes scanning the faded words. It was a message that seemed to come from a time long before I had lived in the house. The letter spoke of secrets hidden in the attic, of things that should never be discovered. The handwriting was scrawled and almost frantic, as though the writer had been in a hurry to finish it. The last line of the letter sent a chill down my spine. "Do not open the door." I stood frozen for a moment, the letter slipping from my hands as I processed what I had just read. The words seemed to echo in my mind. Had this message been written by someone who had lived here before me? Was there something in the attic that I was not supposed to uncover? My mind raced with possibilities. Could the locked door have been some kind of warning? I hurriedly left the attic, closing the door behind me. The house felt colder now, as though something had shifted in the air. I didn't know what to think. The letter didn't explain the missing key or the strange locking of the door, but it made me uneasy. I had always thought of the attic as just a place to store old things, but now I wasn't so sure. There was something more to it, something I wasn't meant to understand. That night, I locked the door once more, my mind racing with unanswered questions. The house seemed different, as if it was holding secrets that I was never meant to discover. And as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that the attic was watching me, waiting for me to unlock the door again. Story 22. I had always been careful with my belongings, especially my wallet. It wasn't just a wallet. It was a collection of memories, photographs, old receipts, a ticket from a concert I'd been to years ago, and of course my ID and credit cards. That morning I had left it on the kitchen counter while I was preparing breakfast, just as I always did. After a while I finished eating, cleaned up, and went about my day, thinking nothing of it. When I returned to the kitchen later that afternoon, I was shocked to find that my wallet was gone. At first I thought maybe I had misplaced it. I searched the countertops, the drawers, even under the kitchen table, but it wasn't anywhere to be found. A sense of unease started to settle in as I checked the living room, my bedroom, and even the bathroom, but there was no sign of it. I couldn't fathom how it had disappeared, especially since I was sure I had left it on the counter. I retraced my steps, trying to remember if anyone had been to the house that day, but I hadn't had any visitors, and the door had been locked all morning. I asked my roommate if they had seen it, but they hadn't. I even called my neighbor to see if they had noticed anything unusual, but they hadn't seen anything either. I tried to remain calm, telling myself that I must have just forgotten where I placed it, but the more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed. The days passed, and I continued to search for the wallet. I emptied my bags, checked my coat pockets, and went through every drawer in the house. I even called my credit card companies to report the cards as lost, just in case someone had taken it. The strangest part was that nothing seemed out of place. No signs of a break-in, no missing cash, no odd activity on my accounts. It was as though my wallet had simply vanished into thin air. A week went by, and I had almost given up hope of finding it. I had accepted the loss and was preparing to get a new ID and replace my cards. But then, one afternoon, something strange happened. I walked to the mailbox, as I did every day, and found a letter waiting for me. The envelope was plain, with no return address. I opened it cautiously, wondering who could be sending me something without a name or explanation. Inside, there was a single folded piece of paper. At first, I thought it was some sort of odd joke or prank, but when I unfolded it, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. It was my wallet. Not just an envelope with a note, but my actual wallet, returned to me after it had been missing for a full week. I turned the wallet over in my hands, examining it to make sure it was the same one. The worn leather, the fading crease from years of use, and even the small scratch on the corner that had been there for as long as I could remember. It was unmistakably mine. There was no note, no explanation, just the wallet. I stood there in the yard, holding it in my hands, unable to comprehend what had just happened. How had it ended up in my mailbox? Why had someone taken it in the first place? And who had returned it without leaving any clue as to why? It was one of those moments that left me feeling uneasy, as if there was something bigger going on that I couldn't understand. I brought the wallet inside, sitting down at the kitchen table to inspect it more closely. The first thing I noticed was that it was still intact. The cash that had been inside was gone, but all of my credit cards, IDs, and the photos were still there, exactly as I had left them. The leather of the wallet was slightly scuffed, but it looked otherwise unchanged. I even checked the cards to see if any of them had been used, but there was no sign of any unauthorized transactions. As I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Who would take my wallet and then just return it a week later with no explanation? I felt like I was missing something, some detail that could explain it all, but the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. There were no fingerprints on the wallet, no signs of tampering, nothing that could give me any clues as to who was responsible. The strangest part was that, after receiving the wallet, I never felt the same sense of security I had before. It was as if something had changed in the very fabric of reality. It wasn't just the fact that my wallet had disappeared and reappeared. It was the nagging feeling that I had been part of something I didn't fully understand. There was a sense of dread, as though I had unknowingly crossed a line, and the return of my wallet was just the beginning of something more. I spent the next few days trying to piece together what had happened. I retraced my steps from the week before, trying to find any hint, anything that could explain how my wallet had disappeared and why it had returned. I even considered the possibility that I had simply misplaced it, and someone had found it and decided to return it anonymously. But that didn't explain the strange feeling I had when I found it in my mailbox, nor the complete lack of any explanation for its return. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to normal, but the mystery of the missing wallet still haunted me. Every now and then I would catch myself glancing at the mailbox, half expecting to find another strange envelope or note waiting for me. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me, as if the disappearance of my wallet was just a small part of a much bigger puzzle that I wasn't meant to solve. Even now, when I hold my wallet, I can't help but wonder, who took it? Why? And what was the real reason it was returned? The answers remain a mystery, and I've come to realize that some things are better left unexplained. But I can't help but feel that the strange events surrounding my missing wallet are just one of many strange things that might be waiting for me, just out of sight, lurking in the corners of my everyday life. Story 23. I was lounging on the couch one evening, scrolling aimlessly through my phone when something caught my eye. A photo buried deep in the gallery stood out among the usual snapshots of friends and random selfies. It was a picture of me taken while I was asleep in my bed. I blinked and stared at it for a moment, feeling an unsettling shiver run down my spine. I didn't remember taking it, nor did I remember anyone else being in my room. I zoomed in, trying to make sense of the image. There I was, in my bed, seemingly unaware of the camera. But what made the picture so disturbing was the figure standing in the background. A silhouette, barely visible, but there nonetheless. It wasn't an N I recognized, and the more I stared at it, the more my heart began to race. It looked like a person, but there was something wrong about it, like the figure was almost blending into the shadows, as if it didn't belong there. I quickly checked the time on the photo, hoping to find some clue as to when it had been taken. The timestamp indicated it was taken sometime during the night, a time when I was definitely asleep. The thought of someone standing over me while I was completely unaware made my stomach churn. I could barely remember the last time I'd left my phone unattended, and I certainly hadn't taken any photos that night. It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was right there in front of me. Panicking, I checked the rest of the photos on my phone, hoping to find something else that might explain this. But there was nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual pictures from the past few weeks. I scrolled through my messages and apps, but everything appeared normal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly off. I felt as though I was being watched. The figure in the background haunted me. Its features were indistinct, just a vague outline of a person, and it seemed to stand perfectly still in the shadows. The only detail that stood out was the long, thin arms that stretched down toward the floor, almost as though the figure was leaning over me. I couldn't stop imagining how it might have stood there, watching me sleep while I remained completely unaware. Who was this person? How had they gotten into my room without me noticing? I tried to tell myself that I was being paranoid, that it could just be a glitch with my phone's camera or an accidental snap taken when I was adjusting the device. But the more I thought about it, the less likely that seemed. My phone was never on my bed, and I always made sure it was either on my desk or in the other room when I went to sleep. Besides, the angle of the shot was too precise. It had to have been taken intentionally. I went to bed that night, but sleep didn't come easy. My mind kept racing, replaying the image over and over again. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure standing by my bed. I had the overwhelming sensation that it wasn't just a random person in the background. It was someone who had been there, watching me for a reason. I tried to shake off the thought, but it lingered like a shadow, casting doubt over everything. The next morning, I woke up groggy and disoriented. I reached for my phone, hoping to clear my mind by checking something mundane. But when I opened the gallery, my heart stopped. The photo was gone. In its place was a single image of a black screen. I immediately checked my recently deleted folder, but there was nothing there either. It was as if the photo had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind. I couldn't explain it. It felt like something or someone was playing with my mind, but that didn't stop me from searching my phone for any signs of tampering. I checked the app history, wondering if someone had hacked my phone or somehow gained access to it while I was asleep. Everything seemed secure. No suspicious activity, no unfamiliar apps installed. It was like the photo had been there just for me to find, only to disappear once I acknowledged it. Days passed, and I tried to move on, convincing myself that it had been some kind of technical glitch, but the unease never fully left. The image kept coming back to me in moments of silence, when I was alone with my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching me. It was as if the photo had been a warning, a glimpse into something far more sinister than I could comprehend. Then, one evening, a notification popped up on my phone while I was sitting at my desk. It was a message from an unknown number, just a single line of text: "You should have stayed asleep." My hands trembled as I stared at the message, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't recognize the number, but the words sent a chill through me. It was a message that seemed to know exactly what had happened the night I found the photo. I immediately tried to call the number, but it was disconnected. A sense of dread crept over me as I scrolled through my contacts, wondering if I had accidentally saved the number at some point. But there was nothing, no record of it, just a blank, empty spot in my phone's history. I couldn't help but feel that the message had somehow come from the same entity that had taken that photo of me. Whoever or whatever was behind this, it was no longer content with leaving subtle clues. It was now communicating with me directly. I spent the next few days on edge, looking over my shoulder whenever I was out in public, convinced that someone might be following me. The feeling of being watched was almost unbearable. and I couldn't shake the thought that the figure from the photo was still out there, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself again. I tried to delete the unknown message, but it wouldn't go away. It lingered in my inbox, mocking me. The strangest part came when I woke up one morning and checked my phone again. To my horror, the photo had returned. But this time it was different. The figure in the background was much clearer, its face now visible. It was a woman, pale, with dark, hollow eyes that seemed to stare right into my soul. Her mouth was slightly open, as if she were about to speak. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the image, frozen in place. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it wasn't finished with me yet. The photo had come back, and this time it felt like a warning one I couldn't ignore. Story 24. It was a quiet afternoon when I came home from work, the house empty as usual. I didn't expect anything out of the ordinary. The door opened with a familiar creak, and I stepped inside, kicking off my shoes as I did every day. But something felt off immediately, though I couldn't pinpoint what it was. There was a subtle shift in the air, a stillness that seemed heavier than usual. As I walked through the hallway, I noticed a trail of torn paper scattered across the floor. At first, I thought maybe I'd accidentally dropped something earlier in the day, but the neatness of the paper pieces quickly dispelled that idea. The paper was carefully torn, each piece about the same size, and they seemed to lead from the front door directly to my bedroom. It didn't make any sense. Why would there be paper like this, laid out so deliberately? I bent down to get a closer look. The paper was a faded yellow, old and brittle, like it had been there for years, even though I knew I had never seen it before. There were no footprints around the pieces, no signs that anyone had walked through. It was as though the paper had appeared on its own, each torn scrap placed meticulously, one by one. My breath caught in my throat, a chill running down my spine. This was no accident. Someone had done this on purpose. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. The trail was unsettling, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. I had to know what this meant, what it was leading to. Stepping carefully, I followed the path of torn paper, each step making the air feel thicker, heavier. The trail seemed endless, wrapping around corners and leading deeper into the house. My mind raced as I wondered who could have done this. Had someone broken into my house? Had I missed something earlier? But there were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows or doors. Everything was as it should be, except for the paper. The pieces of paper continued to lead me through the hallway, up the stairs, and toward my bedroom. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach with each step, as though something was waiting for me. The thought of someone being inside my house, someone who had carefully planned this, was almost too much to bear. My pulse quickened, and my hand instinctively reached for my phone. But I didn't call the police. Not yet. I needed to see where this trail ended to understand what was going on. Finally, I reached my bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and the paper trail ended just outside it. I stood in the doorway, staring into the dim room. Everything seemed normal at first glance, but there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, something different in the way the light from the window fell across the floor. I stepped inside, carefully, my eyes scanning the room. That's when I saw it. The bed was perfectly made, the covers pulled tight. But on the floor next to it, scattered in a messy pile, were more torn pieces of paper. This time the pieces were different. They were not the same yellow as the ones in the hallway. They were new, freshly torn, with jagged edges that hadn't yet begun to fade. It was as if someone had started a new trail inside my room, continuing the path that had begun outside. My heart raced, and I immediately backed away from the bed, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The pieces of paper on the floor near the bed were too many to count. They were scattered in a way that didn't seem random. Each one was positioned in a deliberate pattern. I bent down, reaching for one of the new pieces and unfolding it carefully. It was a scrap of notebook paper with writing on it, written in hurried scrawl. The words were barely legible, but I could make out one phrase: "I'm watching you." I froze, the words echoing in my mind. My fingers trembled as I looked at the other pieces. Each one contained more writing. A strange, cryptic message that seemed to grow more unsettling the longer I read. "I know where you go," one said. "I know your every move," said another. The messages weren't just random. They were personal, as if someone had been tracking my every step, watching me from the shadows. My mind raced as I pieced together the fragments of the notes. Who was watching me? And how long had this been going on? Had they been here before, leaving these messages behind? The torn paper, the cryptic writing, it was all too much. I felt trapped in my own home, a sense of dread creeping over me. I stepped back, my breath shallow, trying to clear my head. I looked around the room, searching for any sign of someone's presence. There was nothing. No one was there. The house was empty, just like it had been when I came home. But the pieces of paper told a different story. Someone had been here. Someone had been leaving a trail for me to find. Suddenly, I heard the faintest sound, like a whisper, just barely audible, coming from the corner of the room. I turned, but there was nothing there. The room was silent, still. The air felt thick, and the shadows in the corners seemed to stretch out, as if they were reaching toward me. My pulse raced, my mind whirling with fear and confusion. Was I losing my mind, or was someone still in the house with me? I decided I couldn't stay there any longer. My heart was pounding in my chest as I rushed to the front door. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, my hand shaking as I spoke to the operator. I told them everything: the trail of paper, the messages, the feeling that someone had been inside my house. They said they'd send someone over to investigate, but the words felt hollow, empty. What if the person was still here, watching me even now? I spent the rest of the night sitting on my porch, watching the house from a distance. The police arrived, but by the time they searched the house, they found nothing unusual. No signs of a break-in, no one hiding in the shadows. It was as if the trail of paper had disappeared along with the person who had left it. The next morning, when I returned to the house, the torn paper was gone. The trail that had led me from the front door to my bedroom had vanished, as if it had never been there at all. My bedroom was exactly the same as it had been before, and the writing on the paper was gone too. The house was silent once again, and I felt a strange sense of relief, mixed with unease. But as I walked through the hall, something caught my eye: a small piece of paper, tucked under the couch in the living room. I reached down and picked it up, unfolding it carefully. The message was simple: "I'll be back." Story 25. I was sitting at my desk, deep into my work, when the email notification pinged. It wasn't uncommon to receive messages late at night, especially since I worked remotely. But this one was strange. It didn't have a subject line, and the body of the message was empty, save for an attachment. At first, I thought it might be a mistake, maybe something corrupted or sent by accident. But there was something about it that made me hesitate for a moment before clicking it. I opened the attachment, and my stomach dropped. The image that appeared on my screen was a picture of me taken from behind. I could see the back of my chair, my laptop in front of me, and the faint reflection of my face in the screen. The unsettling part wasn't the picture itself, but the way it had been taken. There was no one else in the room. I was completely alone at my desk when I received the email, but somehow someone had managed to capture this image without me noticing. I sat frozen for a moment, staring at the photo in disbelief. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of what to do next. I closed the file quickly, but the feeling of unease lingered. My heart was pounding as I scanned the room, half expecting someone to jump out from behind the curtains or the doorway, but nothing was there. The house was quiet still, and I was alone, just as I had been when the picture was taken. I told myself it was a prank, some sort of bizarre joke from a friend or colleague, but deep down I knew that didn't feel right. I clicked through my emails, searching for anything that might explain what had just happened. There was nothing unusual, no other strange messages, but that image, it was seared into my mind. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mistake, some glitch or error in a photo sharing app that had somehow uploaded a photo of me. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettling the situation became. How had the person gotten so close without me noticing? Why was there no subject or text in the email, just an attachment? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The more I thought about it, the more I felt the weight of someone's gaze on me. It was like they were in the room, hidden just out of sight, waiting for me to let my guard down. I shook the thought away, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. But every time I glanced at my screen or heard a noise from downstairs, my mind would race back to that photo. The next morning, I went about my usual routine, trying to push the strange incident to the back of my mind. I logged into work, answered emails, and pretended like everything was normal. But the moment I sat down at my desk, I could feel it, the same uneasy sensation. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me just like the night before. But every time I turned around, there was nothing, just empty space. As the day went on, I couldn't focus. Every time I sat down at my desk, I was reminded of the email, the photo. It felt like I was living in some sort of distorted reality where everything was normal, except for this one thing that I couldn't explain. The idea of being watched, of someone silently observing me, gnawed at me. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a constant presence in the back of my mind. That evening, I received another email. My heart skipped a beat when I saw it. The subject was still empty, and the body of the email was just as blank as before. I didn't want to open it, but I couldn't stop myself. The attachment downloaded, and I hesitated before clicking on it. When the file opened, my stomach churned. It was another photo. This time I was standing in front of my window, looking out at the street. But I hadn't been near the window all day. The photo had been taken from outside, from across the street, and it was clear someone had been watching me. I felt like the walls were closing in. I couldn't breathe. I slammed my laptop shut and backed away from the desk. My mind raced, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. Someone had been inside my house, watching me, taking pictures of me without me knowing. I wasn't sure if I should call the police or if I was just overreacting. What if it was all just a strange coincidence, a sick joke from someone who knew how to make me feel paranoid? But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. This wasn't normal. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours pacing around my house, checking the locks on every door and window. I even moved the furniture around to make sure no one could hide behind it. But no matter what I did, the unease wouldn't leave me. It felt like someone was right there with me, just out of sight, waiting for me to slip up. I couldn't stop thinking about those photos. How had they been taken? How had someone gotten so close to me without my noticing? The next day, I took my laptop to a technician. hoping they could find something that would explain the photos, maybe some kind of software or virus that could explain it all. But after running a full diagnostic, the technician told me the laptop was clean. There were no signs of tampering or hacking. Everything appeared to be normal. I left the store feeling even more confused. If it wasn't a virus, then what was it? I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I walked past my windows or glanced at the door, I expected to see someone standing there, waiting for me to look away. But there was never anyone there. I kept checking my emails, but there were no new messages. No more photos, just silence. It was as if the person had vanished, disappeared into thin air. But even though the photos stopped, the feeling didn't. Every time I sat down at my desk, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching me. The silence was deafening, and the unease never fully went away. Whoever had taken those pictures was still out there, somewhere, and I couldn't help but wonder when they would strike again. Story 26. I had just finished a long day of work when I heard a knock at the door. It was late, and the evening was quiet, with only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of traffic breaking the stillness of my apartment. At first, I thought it was a mistaken delivery or someone in need of directions. But as I made my way to the door, a strange sense of unease settled in my chest. There was something about the knock that felt off, like an unspoken tension hanging in the air. I opened the door cautiously, half expecting to find a neighbor or a solicitor. Instead, there stood a man I had never seen before. He was in his late 30s, wearing a dark jacket and faded jeans. His face was nondescript, but there was an intensity in his eyes that I couldn't shake. He smiled slightly, but it didn't reach his eyes, making me feel even more uncomfortable. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice a little sharper than I intended. The man didn't answer right away. He just stood there, staring at me for a moment before speaking. "You don't remember me, do you?" he said in a low voice, his tone almost too casual. "I've been trying to contact